Teachers of Reddit. What clicked about a pupil after meeting their parents? Obligatory, not a teacher, but I work at a psychiatric hospital for children and teens. I work directly with the kids, so I don't get to meet the parents often. We had a super sweet little girl on my unit once. They said it was because she assaulted her little 3-year-old sister, but the whole thing just didn't make sense. I can read kids well, and usually the ones that are violent and dangerous to family have a certain attitude. She just didn't. She was meek, respectful, and just overall the easiest patient I've ever had. When visitation came, her parents showed up and it all started to make sense. They would just berate her for everything. Here was this little 9-year-old girl and her mom is telling her she's effed up, why can't she be normal, etc., etc. And this kid just took it on the chin. Not for long though, because I am allowed to remove the child at my discretion if I think it will make it worse for her, and so I did, and promptly called CPS. It turns out that all the abuse she was doing to her sister was just the mother abusing both of them and then blaming it on the little girl. You will all be happy to know that she moved in with her grandparents in a different state and is thriving and happy. Story 2. This is from back when I was doing my student teaching. There was a girl in one of my classes that never did any work in class, turned in her homework late, and would ignore huge projects until literally the last minute, and then ask to come in for help on every day at lunch and after school to make up for the missing work. Eventually, I caught her cheating on a quiz. She had written down the answers, put them in a plastic cover of her binder, and put her binder down by her feet. I took her quiz, gave her a 0, and told her that cheating was not allowed. About a week later, we had a parent-teacher conference. The girl came in with her mother, who took out every assignment that had been graded and handed back and proceeded to argue with me over individual points. Things along the lines of, well, she spelled it all right, so that deserves some credit, right? Or, she circled the right answer, so she should still get some credit, when the right answer had been crossed off and then another answer had been selected. This took nearly an hour to go through. Finally, the mother brought the quiz and I told her about the cheating. The mom said, well, you should give her some credit on it. She was pretty clever to think of that trick. From that on, I made sure to schedule meetings with myself, my mentor teacher, and the principal present. Has anyone ever successfully cheated on a test? I was taking architecture in college one day and this guy leaned over and he had, I've never seen it in real life until now, but he literally wrote down his entire arm from the shoulder to the wrist in Sharpie, answers to all the questions. He's like, hey bro, you need a little help? I got you. He ended up failing that exam. Story 3. I was that kid. Father worked shifts, and when he was home, he was doing backyard car repairs to help make ends meet. Not because he didn't earn a good living, he actually did, but because my mother was a gambling addict. Instead of addressing the problem, he focused on solving the symptoms. I went to school from an unheated house with a mother still in bed and no breakfast in freezing weather with no coat because she spent the money on gambling. Went for years without medical treatment for the same reason. No toothpaste, no hair conditioner, no haircuts, old shoes, socks, and underwear with the holes in it. All because anything she could make us do without went to gambling. PE was done in the frigid school gym in bare feet and a t-shirt because gym shoes and sweatshirts cost extra money that could be used to make bets instead. One day the vice principal called me to her office. Not to reprimand me, but to give me the optional pieces of uniform that I didn't have, like a coat and a school blazer. They were the options without which you froze half to death as you walked or biked several miles to school. She didn't make a big deal out of it, she simply met a need. Her act of kindness lit a spark in me. To this day, almost 40 years later, I still put money, time, and hard work into caring for others and charity work. I'm the mom who will volunteer at school, quietly contribute anything the teachers are short of that person. Not for recognition or thanks. In fact, I am embarrassed if you do that. It's because nearly 40 years ago, someone cared for me. Story 4. Not a teacher, but a student. In kindergarten, we had this kid who was really odd and smelled funny. But he seemed cool, so we would hang out at recess. I had a birthday party and was only supposed to last maybe a few hours. All of the kids but him went home fairly early, but it was really late and his parents still hadn't showed up. I was getting tired and wanted to go to bed, so my parents set up some blankets for us in the living room, and we had a sleepover. At 2 a.m., his parents finally show up, after multiple calls with no answer. Instantly, I realized what was up. Even as a small child, I knew these parents were the definition of white trash. They reeked of alcohol. My mom's side of the family is full of alcoholics, so I knew what it smelled like. They also told some bullcrap story about how they had new tires on their car and the speedometer showed the wrong speed, so they got pulled over, and some other bullcrap. It all clicked why he acted so odd and why he smelled like cigarette smoke. At the start of first grade, he never showed up, and like the month into the year, he was there for a few days. Then randomly in third grade, he showed back up again for a few weeks. I never saw him again after that. I looked him up on Facebook a while back, and it looks like he is following in his parents' footsteps up into following into every white trash stereotype. I asked my parents about this kid a while ago, and they said that the reason he wasn't with us in school for a few years is that he got taken away by Child Protective Services, which my mom called. Then he came back at times because that's when his parents got him back, but he was taken away again, and that's why he left us. I feel bad for the kid, because at first he was really nice, but over time as I saw him again, he became white trash. Story 5. I'm the kid. When I was growing up, I'd get pulled aside and asked if I smoked. I'm talking elementary school, by the way. My parents, much like someone else had mentioned, smoked in the house with the windows closed. I was heavy, really heavy, with a lot of confidence issues that still stick around to this day. I had problems with anger growing up, not so much now, but I was an excellent student when you could inspire me to focus or I found something I was passionate about. They'd meet my parents and nod to me. My dad, who would work swing and overtime every day almost to support my mom's 2 to 3 pack a day habit at the time. Now it's only 1 pack, supposedly. My mom, who basically looked strung out on drugs, but was really just taking so many antipsychotics and pain meds that she might as well have been. My parents tried to be supportive of me, but I'm not sure they really knew how. I'd keep a bottle of Febreze on me starting in middle school because the questioning from teachers had gotten so bad. I'm graduating college in June, even though it's taken me twice as long as it should have, mostly because of money, a lack of guidance, and my own mental BS. I got a job working in student government for the first time ever, and was sent to a conference in Washington, D.C. by my college last year. I worked my first non-minimum wage job this summer and got invited to come back with another raise. To my 4th and 5th grade teacher, if you're reading this, I'm okay, I did it, and I hope your ladybug collection has grown. Story 6. A girl in my 7th grade class was really bright, but almost never turned in her homework, so she just skated by on test scores. One time I commended her for helping another student who didn't understand the assignment, only to realize that night that she didn't do her own work. I called her parents in and quickly realized they're the type that have an answer for everything and were all too quick to put the responsibility on me, as if I should stand over their daughter to make sure she works. I turned to ask the girl what she thought, since she had been completely quiet and her parents began to answer for her again. I put my finger, my index, up and said, "No, you've had your turn. I want to hear what she thinks about all this." Well, she apparently really appreciated that because she went on for about 30 minutes about all her views on education. At the end, I kept her parents quiet and told her that if she's willing to talk at such a big game, she needs to back it up and do the work without her parents or me interfering. She didn't miss another assignment all year. Proud teacher moment. Story 7. These children, there were 3 of them, were known for being difficult at the after-school care I worked in. I had always heard bad things about the dad, but not until I actually experienced it firsthand did I make the connection between his parenting and his kids' behavior. The eldest, 5th grade, would refuse to listen to us. He would often kick other children, provoke them by grabbing them and pulling them in close, or just act out in a way that was verbally abusive. When we asked him to stop, he would respond with, "Screw you!" The middle, 3rd grade, struggled to pay attention for more than 5 minutes and often picked on other kids by intentionally stirring them up or spreading rumors. The youngest, in kindergarten, was 6 but still not entirely toilet trained and had to repeat kindergarten because she wasn't at normal development or social levels. One afternoon, the eldest is in a pretty good mood. Because I'm curious, I ask, and he announces proudly, "Dad is picking me up early at 4 p.m. because we're going to see a movie this afternoon." This is awesome because the 3 kids are always last to be picked up. But 4 p.m. comes and goes and there's no sign of Dad. 4:30, 5, 6, 6:30. It's closing time now. We get a call from Dad. "I'm sorry, I got caught up." It's almost 7 p.m. before the dad arrives. As the kid grabs their bags, he tries to explain to me, but he's sort of all over the place. Some actual quotes from our conversation. "Don't tell the kids, but I'm so gone right now. I stayed back with some mates and had some drinks. Investment banking is stressful, so you look forward to Friday. So you'd be, 20 now? What's a young pretty thing like you doing working so late on a Friday night?" He offers to slip some cash to me and my coworker for the extra time. My mate is driving us home. I only trust some of my mates with the new Porsche." The nail in the coffin was when the eldest asked Dad, "I thought you said we were going to see that movie tonight." To which he simply replies, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot." And in that moment, I realized that these kids were being told over and over and over that you don't really matter that much. Edit. About 2 months after this happened, the kids packed up and left the school with about a week's notice. Although they told us how much they hated us regularly, I hadn't ever seen them all as quiet as in that last week, and we haven't seen them since. Story 8. Had a kid that you looked at and was very much a lights are on but nobody is home sort of feeling? I teach high school, so sometimes that's just the phase they are in, but this one was basically living perpetually in that mode. Kid has an IEP, Individualized Educational Plan, which is a legal special education doc. I can't reveal what was in there, but it was, suffice to say, generic, so it feels like there are pieces missing. Days go on, this kid is the gold standard of something is up, completely illegible handwriting to the point it doesn't resemble writing at all. You ask about what we are doing in class, and the answer is so random and off-task that if the kid didn't look and act fairly childlike for their age, you would assume hardcore drug use. But this kid, if anything, had Ralph Wiggum genes and didn't know what drugs were. Mom comes to back to school night, which is supposed to be 5 minutes with the class of parents, a nice how do you do, and everyone moves on. But she corners me, immediately starts telling me about her concerns that I don't fully appreciate her miracle baby who was mute until 8, didn't walk until 4, walked backwards first, and had an IQ of about 60. They told her this kid would never make it in the school, and didn't I think you just couldn't tell anything was ever delayed? Because this is a miracle. That's why she blocked all mention of those conditions from the documents, because people would never guess otherwise. Miracle. When the word miracle comes up from a parent, it always explains a lot. Story 9. We had a crazy kid in 6th grade a few years back. I mean, he was the type of kid you assume will probably go on a shooting spree at some point. He was diagnosed with all sorts of acronyms, so he was on a ton of meds. On his medicine, he was defiant, but manageable. Typical class clown type stuff. Off his medicine? Oh man. We could all tell when he came in the building whether or not he had taken it. It was in his eyes or something. He routinely refused to do anything and had to be physically carried, limp-bodied, to the principal's office a few times. He hit a teacher once and called another one a female dog to her face in the same day. We had a parent-teacher night and his mom came in. She was 26, he was 12. It became clear to us that the reason he was off meds so much was because she was taking them. She'd also just had another baby, so he was acting out more because of that. His mother also had a very low IQ, clearly, and so did he. He ended up getting sent to alternative school eventually, and I never saw him again. Story 10. When I was student teaching in 2nd grade, there was a little boy in the class who was just a genuinely friendly and sweet kid. He struggled a little academically when it came to learning to read, and his handwriting had some problems, but he was the hardest worker and never got frustrated or thought that he was stupid, like many other students with those difficulties do. He was well liked by everyone and didn't have a mean bone in his body, and he was extremely well adjusted despite the fact that his parents were divorced. I ended up meeting both parents separately during field trips. Both parents are extremely involved in his life and put him ahead of any of the problems they have with each other. They genuinely want what's best for him, and it shows. The dad takes him out to the sports bar for boys' night where they share root beer, which I thought was really cool. Both parents genuinely are awesome people with great attitudes, and it definitely shows in their kid. Story 11. Not yet a teacher, but studying to be one. In one of my major field experiences, there was a kid who was insanely competitive. He would take everything as a challenge and would accuse others of cheating if he lost. He even challenged me, a 19-year-old student at the time, to a race. I told him it really wouldn't be fair since I was fully grown, and he started berating me that I was scared to race him. Mind you, he was 9 at this time. So the end of the year was coming around, and we had a field day where parents volunteered to do games for the kids, and it was supposed to be a fun day full of popsicles and school games. His parents had a relay race, spin around the bat, jump rope a certain distance, etc. And when it was his turn, they encouraged him to cheat by not following their rules and got upset because some poor girl dropped the bat, obviously meaning she would be disqualified. They also brought a tug-of-war rope, and it was the girls of the class versus the boys, the girls being outnumbered. My field experience teacher put me on their team. I decided I wouldn't tug, so that was a bit more fair, but once again, the student's parents started getting red in the face, telling him to win. I looked at my field experience teacher, and she just nodded. So I pulled as hard as I could. Kid got knocked down a peg. Story 12. Why he was fluent in English, Spanish, and German. I was teaching a grade 3 class that year, if I remember correctly, and I had the pleasure of meeting this wonderful, polite young man named Mark. Mark was a delight to teach, very cheerful, picked things up quickly, got on well with other kids. One day we did a project on what makes me unique, and Mark was having some trouble explaining what he wanted to write. He said, well, In German, it would be insert German expression here, but in Spanish, it could be Spanish expression here. But I don't know how to write it in English. I asked him how he knew those languages, and he shrugged and said he thought most kids probably could, and that's all I could get out of him. Obviously, I was curious, but I didn't want to pry too far and make him feel self-conscious about it, so I just helped him with his project and waited patiently for parent-teacher interviews. Both of Mark's parents showed up to the interview, and it was clear almost immediately why he was fluent in those languages. His mother and father were lovely people, but they had the annoying habit of switching languages every few words when discussing with each other, before returning me a sentence in English. I asked them how they were so fluent, and it turns out that they had moved a lot because of the father's job, and the mother's career was very flexible. Internet-based income, I think. So that sorted that right out. Mystery solved. Except that although he spoke English, Spanish, and German, and both his parents were Chinese. Story 13. First year of working at my current job, not a teacher, but I do work with children on a daily basis, and I overhear this conversation between a group of 4th grade girls. Girl 1. What do you want to be when you grow up? Girl 2. I don't know. I really like dancing and stuff. Girl 3. I'm not sure either. What about you? Girl 1. I'm going to get pregnant and get food stamps and welfare. I really, really wish I was embellishing this story. I wish to God that I was making all or at least part of this up. When my coworker heard this, she about lost it. Well, we knew what mom was like, so it was no surprise. Unmarried, 4 kids at the time, and looked like she was no older than about 23. They were known amongst the staff for being in poverty, as the girls, yes, all her children were girls, frequently came in wearing the same dirty clothes, bills going unpaid, etc. We tried incredibly hard to change this. Numerous times when we had events, we set aside something specifically for this family. When my partner at work heard this, she went ballistic. She contacted the university in my town and set up a field trip with numerous guest speakers from the dance team, cheerleading team, sports teams, and a few other groups to show the kids what all they could do to get out of college. The kids really seemed to enjoy it, especially those girls, and they all talked about the rest of the day about how cool those people were. Story 14. I was an elementary teacher's aide for several years in college. We were having a parent-teacher conference with a struggling 5th grader and his parents. The poor kid was bright, but somewhat lazy and reading at barely a 1st grade level. The teacher laid out what we've been working on with the student individually for the last few months to try to improve his reading and get him engaged in learning. The teacher then gently suggested that the kid should be practicing his reading at home with an adult. I suggested that since the kid loved Pokemon, there were some juvenile novelizations of Pokemon stories at the local bookstore that he may enjoy, and that it would help interest and engage him in improving his reading comprehension. I'll never forget the withering look the father gave me. We don't have extra money lying around to buy something like that he can do at school. I was 19 at the time and shaky around confrontation, so I lowered my gaze and shut my mouth. The teacher reassured the parents that we were doing everything in our power to help their child and that we would continue helping their son improve his reading. That was that. A few days after this, the students were taking turns at the end of the day telling us something good that happened to them that week. A ritual that I really admired that the teacher started, and the kids loved it. When it was the struggling student's turn, he stood up and got an empty video game case and controller out of his bag and said, "This week, my dad bought the new PlayStation and lots of new games, and we've been staying up late every night playing." I almost cried in frustration and pity. Please understand, I have absolutely nothing against kids playing video games, but it has to be in moderation. His effing parents just sat there and told us that they had no extra money to help their kid not only get better at learning, but actually do something that he loved. Like a gosh dang $5 book about Pokemon, but then they turn around and spend hundreds of dollars on a new PlayStation and games. Maybe buy your kid a book about video games, you a-hole. So frustrating. Story 15. I was a daycare teacher while going to college. I had one kid who was a total effing nightmare. Andrew. He was only a toddler, but imagine the terrible 2s and then increase them by 10. Kids at that age are still learning proper behavior, but the rest of my kids understood basic manners. Andrew was a hurricane in human form. If there was a fight, Andrew was in the middle of it. He was the kid who'd start screaming in the middle of quiet time just to cause chaos. Wouldn't do what he was told, wouldn't listen to anybody, wouldn't keep his hands to himself. Every teacher in the place constantly wanted to strangle him, self included. Andrew was the only kid known by name to the entire teaching staff, even at the elementary school level. People would be like, "There goes Andrew's teacher, poor girl." He was that kid. Then I met his mom. I'm positive she was married, but I never saw Andrew's dad and never met him. The guy didn't seem involved in his son's life at all. The mom was a nervous wreck and talked to Andrew like he was a doll with a fatal disease who was going to die any day, not a real person with feelings of his own or who needed to learn a little self-autonomy. She insisted on doing everything for him as if he were completely incapable. At that point, I realized I had to start praising the crap out of this kid because he certainly wasn't going to get any direction or positive attention at home. So I wait for my opportunity. It took a few days simply because Andrew was such a holy terror, but then suddenly I'll never forget that fateful Tuesday. The kids are sitting at the lunch table waiting to wash their hands for lunch. I have to pick the first kid, and Andrew happens to be quietly sitting there with his hands folded while the other kids are jumping around in their seats. It was a true miracle. I'm sure somewhere nearby people were reporting sightings of the Virgin Mary and the rivers running red. "Andrew!" I exclaimed. "Andrew's sitting so nicely, I think he gets to wash his hands first today." Andrew looked scared when I called his name because he figured he was in trouble again. Then he figured out what was going on. The kid got out of his seat and approached me looking dazed, like he'd been unexpectedly called up to accept an Emmy. The other kids immediately went dead quiet because they wanted to be picked after Andrew. In that moment, Andrew became the star of the Age 2 classroom. The other kids even started including him in their games. This started a feedback loop. Andrew behaved better, so he got more praise. Then he behaved even more. I'd reward Andrew by letting him hold the storybook for me during story time or helping me with other things. Pretty soon, he became like my personal assistant because I'd turn around and he was just there waiting to help me with something. That kid loved helping. It was incredible. Overnight, he became like a well-mannered Clark Kent. I think Andrew finally developed a sense of pride, something his anxious mom never allowed him. He wanted to wash his own hands, try the toilet by himself, and open doors, which he couldn't quite reach yet, but he improvised with a chair a few times until I caught him. A few weeks into this, I saw his mom at the school. She was trying to tie Andrew's school, but he insisted, No, I can do it. And he did. The look on her face was hilarious. It's like she finally realized he was a real person. I had to leave that job to go back to school a few months later. I was surprised to discover that telling Andrew was the hardest of all my kids because I'd come to like him the most. By that point, he started calling me mommy, and while he stopped after I corrected him, it was clear he still designated with me that role in his mind. When I said I was leaving, he kept asking why and didn't understand. That was pretty hard. I stopped by the school a year later to say hi to my old colleagues, and who do I happen to see but a few of my kids? They'd all grown so much in just a year's time, but I recognized them instantly. The kids saw me, but quickly lost interest. I was just some lady to them now. Story 16. In my first year of teaching high school, I was at an affluent high school, one of the best in the state. I taught honors and AP students in tandem with another teacher. She taught the AP Lit, I taught the history course paired with. The school did not then pair two AP courses. I had a student, let's call him Timmy. He was a typical bright but lazy 15-year-old white kid from an upper middle-class family. He always had the latest phone, he could afford both pot and hard drugs, and he got the 5-year-old hand-me-down BMW when he turned 16, and he had the entitled attitude to go with it. Normally, the Timmys of my school got B pluses and A minuses, just enough to get into the colleges they wanted, not so much that they actually had to work hard. Timmy, on the other hand, did nothing. Literally. If an assignment didn't happen in class, he didn't do it. If it did happen in class, he would hand in an empty page, and if you required him to do something, he would either abacadabra it, the multiple choice, or just put C for everything, or write one-word responses and short answer and essay sections. At first, I was sympathetic. I figured he was going through a divorce at home, or an undiagnosed dyslexic, or something. I discussed it with my co-teacher, and she just said, "No, that's just Timmy." I discussed it with the counselor, same result. It was really driving me nuts. This kid could easily go to college. There's a real chance he's on Reddit now, and he was torpedoing all of it. And worse, if he was known to be so useless, why did they let him into an AP class in the first place? Our kids were bright, driven, and passionate, the sort of kids who came in crying when they missed a homework assignment, not the sort whose response to any question was, "Whatever, man." I documented everything, sent letters home, offered him extra credit, tried any way I could to talk to him, made it very clear that I would fail him, and his response was still just, "Whatever, man." At the end of the semester, his grade was a 17. For non-Americans, bright, hardworking kids get a 93 to 98. Still bright, but not as hardworking, and hardworking but not as bright kids get 85 to 93. Hardworking but not bright gets 77 to 85. Anywhere below 77 is either a learning disability, a behavioral problem, or a poor fit to a class. The absolute basement is normally around 60. 17 is so low as to be unheard of. So, in due course, I failed him. As expected, I immediately heard back from the parents who had been impossible to contact all semester. Turns out she was a neurologist at one of the local university hospitals. He was high up in the state's attorney's office. They both came in with earnest, sincere, good white American expressions and voices, talking about how he's a good boy. Surely we can work something out. I said no, the time for that had been any of the 8 different documented occasions during the semester that I had tried to contact them. At this point, it was unfair to the other students to let him pass. Of course, they didn't like that at all, so they went to the principal. We all sat down and had a very long meeting, and the outcome was I gave him a test. His grade for that test was his grade for the semester. Timmy wasn't stupid, so of course he got a 94, and that was his grade, despite doing 0 work. After that, someone finally bothered to tell me that he had been doing just that for years, and his parents were such amazing pains in the butt that he had been getting away with it. I quit teaching after that. He should be about 27 now, and is probably a horrible human being. Oh, that last sentence was a bit rough. He was just lazy. He didn't attack anybody or anything. Definitely taking advantage of the system and all, but a horrible human being? There's a chance he matured somewhat from 16, 17. Story 17. I wasn't the teacher, I was the kid. Growing up, my siblings and I'm the youngest of 4, adapted to a very dysfunctional lifestyle. My father was an abusive alcoholic that worked 80+ hours a week to support us on a farmer's salary, and my mother was depressed and had no ambition to do anything. I'm talking sleep all day, not cook for us, no food, not take care of herself, go out in public wearing her ratty moo-moo and slippers with her hair all unkempt. My parents weren't equipped for children, but alas, they had 4 of us. Needless to say, my siblings and I raised ourselves. We grew up on cereal and microwaved meals, and witnessed my father beat our mother and threaten to kill her with his gun countless times during his drunken rants, although that was normal for us. It certainly had its lingering effects. Teachers always noticed how mature I was at such a young age, but couldn't understand why I was always so anxious and seemed to be worried all the time. Many times I was told that I had wisdom beyond my years because I was able to look at a person and easily tell what was going on inside their head. My empathy for people was well developed, but I wasn't able to convey to anyone that I never felt safe. I was always on guard, and because of that, I had terrible anxiety. This led to me constantly chewing my fingers to a bloody mess, picking my lips, covering my ears during loud noises, and always being hyper aware of my surroundings. I never felt at peace. I was brought to guidance counselors many times where I talked to them about things that worried me, but it was always on a shallow level. I never talked about how daddy points his gun at mommy and how mommy doesn't feed us. Instead, my siblings and I banded together and supported each other ourselves. We all left home early. My 2 brothers left as soon as they graduated high school and joined the military. My sister left at 15 to live with a boyfriend's family, and I left at 14 to live with a friend's family. I thrived there. I became the child I couldn't be before. Dad left my mom and quit drinking. He's become a rock for our family and has built love and trust with everyone. Seriously, he's a great man, but did some terrible things when he was younger. My mom, well, she's still the same. She's depressed, doesn't work, lives with her brother and sister, constantly comes to my siblings and I for help, and we give in because it's just easier to give in than to fight. And have to listen to, "You kids don't understand, I feel like I'm left behind and pushed to the side," kind of rant. My siblings and I are still really close. We all have decent jobs, we live on our own, raise and support our families. As for me, well, I struggle. Anxiety and depression are a female dog, but I try to see the bright side of things. I just don't want to end up like her. I realize this is sort of off topic. I'm sorry. I guess I just needed to write this out. Story 18. This one broke my heart, and it's something I still think about from time to time. Just a few months into my first year, several 5th grade students were sent home for lice. One was a small blonde girl named Jane, who was fairly quiet and shy. Her clothes were always somewhat unkempt and had a strong cigarette smoke odor. She very rarely completed her homework and hated answering questions in class. However, she was kind, attentive, and performed well on her in-class assignments. We had another round of head checking about a week after the first one and found that Jane still had lice and caught lice again. She was sent home with a call to the parents letting them know. The next day, she walked into the classroom with a shaved head. Her parents shaved her hair off so that they did not have to deal with the lice again. She cried, and when I asked her about it, I felt horrible for her. 5th grade is a tough place to be when you have something that is obviously different about you that the other kids can pick on. I could not grow her hair back for her, but I did buy her a cute hat that I allowed her to wear in my class if she wanted. It seemed to help. When I met her parents shortly after, they showed up with the 3 younger kids that looked about a year apart, with the same shaved haircut as Jane. The parents smelled like cigarette smoke and pet urine odor, and I could hear them cursing at their kids in the hallway before I even saw them. Story 19. Not a teacher, but the story is relevant. Lengthy, but true. I worked for several years as a case manager for adults with mental illness, which put me in their homes on the daily. The one case that haunts me still is the family with 3 semi-functional family members: mom, son, daughter, and the daughter's small 1 to 2-year-old child, and the son's live-in friend. The mother and son were both our clients with various and sundry diagnoses. To say the house was filthy is not giving due diligence to the facility of the English language, but I suppose for this narrative it will suffice. At one point they somehow procured a little yappy dog who proceeded to poop everywhere. It got so bad we wouldn't even go into the house, just meet with them on the porch, as no one ever seemed clean at anything. At all. Ever. Enter CPS. They left the child in the home with the family of mentally ill folks. Dog poop everywhere, and the gods of filth alone know what horrors. Their rationale was, a child needs to be with the family. A short time later, a neighbor called the ASPCA, and they came and took the dog, declaring the home unfit for the pet. I have no idea what became of the child, as I eventually changed jobs and lost contact with those involved, but occasionally when people bring up work war stories, this is my go-to tale. Story 20. Not a teacher, but spent some years in the Coast Guard. Had a kid report in that would have to need several more levels of cognitive ability to be merely stupid. We'll call him effing slow. Effing slow, despite having been to machinery technician A school, didn't know the difference between oil and coolant. Effing slow couldn't understand the concept of buoyancy so much he couldn't understand how a steel ship could float. Our chief in the galley tried to show him using various bowls and cups. Big mistake. Huge. Effing slow learned from this not buoyancy and displacement, but that despite having been on the ship for 3 months, this is when he learned it could sink. Yep, kid thought Coast Guard boats couldn't sink. That's why he had joined the Coast Guard. His recruiter showed him pictures of Navy boats sunk in Pearl Harbor. He never got qualified to do anything. He got wrote up multiple times for everything from self-pleasuring on watch in the engine room to not showering for weeks, to his uniform looking like clothes a homeless hobo wouldn't be caught dead in. Well, we got to meet the parents who had brought effing slow uncle's ashes to be buried at sea, and he had served in Vietnam. Commanding officer and our chief are talking to his parents and assuring them that the burial will be no issue and we can video it if they like. So there we are, me and my CO and chief with effing slow talking to his parents. Chief goes, "What happened to Uncle of effing slow?" Well, a couple years back, effing slow and the uncle had insulated Uncle of effing slow's attic. Old cabin out in some woods. Well, times were hard, logging had really tapered off, so the uncle and effing slow had just used pine needles. So the dad says, and the fire department thinks that the pine needles ignited some sort of spontaneous fire, and he died. Well, that explains it. The gene pool was empty. Story 21. I was a teacher's aide in an after-school care program in an elementary school. It's where the kids come after the school day ends so they can be cared for until the parents get off of work. There was one boy who was a total bully, attention hound. He was stocky and tall and strong for his age, 9 at the time, and a lot of the other kids were scared of him because he demanded that they play with him and then threatened to break things if they didn't do what he wanted. He was totally disrespectful of any adult authority, just a general terror. I disliked him. He was dropped off in the morning by one babysitter and picked up by another at the latest possible time. I never saw a parent. His mother was a news reporter for the Denver Post, like a lady about town who covered the society pages and did reviews of things. Friday afternoon, this kid was being super good. He spent all afternoon drawing things for his mom and saying, "My mom is coming to get me tonight. Not my babysitter's. She has the whole weekend off and we're going to do things together, just her and me. Here's the list of all the things. Things like watch a movie, go for a walk, and eat dinner together." Pickup time arrived, and here comes the mom, yapping away on her cell phone back when having cell phones were very unusual, signing her kid out without speaking to anyone. Her son is standing there holding his pictures to show her, so excited. She hushed him and brushed off his hand away from her. Her conversation was, "Oh, yeah, I can go review that new SPA in Aspen. I'm not doing anything this weekend. Just let me drop off my kid at the babysitter." The kid visibly crumpled in on himself. He was silently crying as his mom yanked him out the door while she yapped and yapped on her phone, not even as much as a, "Hi, honey," to her son. I did my best to be very understanding, caring, and attentive to the kid after that, asking him how his day went, praising him when he behaved well. I wish I knew what became of him. I left to go to college, but I know whenever I saw his mom's byline in the paper, I wanted to kick her in the head. She died recently, and I was like, good. And I may be a horrible person for thinking that, but that kid was simply a chihuahua and a handbag to her. Her obituary said she was especially devoted to her son, and I wanted to puke. All I could see was that little boy with his drawings in his hands, brushed aside by his mother, collapsing in on himself. And I hope he's okay now. Story 22. I have something eating at me while reading this. I came from an abusive household, verbal and on occasion physical. I was quite a meek student, but I made good grades and was never a problem in class for the most part. I did act out at my English class once after a particularly rough night at home, but it was surprisingly my science teacher who confronted me about the incident. Math and science were my favorite classes. This man nearly broke me. I could handle all sorts of yelling and foul words by that age, 11, but that's far from what happened. He looked so sad as he gave me this seemingly never-ending, "I am disappointed in you" speech. I bawled my eyes out. I had never been treated so kindly, and I didn't think I deserved it. I wasn't prone to crying easily either. I had pride in the fact that no matter what my parents did, I'd never let them see tears stain my face. It was the moment that changed everything about how I thought or dealt with things. I trusted him and felt like I needed to, and maybe then I would get the help that I needed. I found his number in the phone book and called him one day after school. Unfortunately, by the time he picked up, I lost my nerve to reach out to him. I hung up. I felt like he knew it was me who called and that I somehow spooked him by doing such a thing. He never met my parents. None of my teachers did except one. Even then, it was my father who had a much better grip on his temper than my mother. I always felt guilty about this, like it would be my fault from then on if he never reached out to any other kids in need. I always carry a feeling around that I owe him an apology for disappointing him, for acting out in class, or calling his house, for not being brave enough to trust him with the help that I knew I needed. I wish he knew how much my life and attitude towards my situation that day. I no longer wish I hadn't been born. I started to see that there was light at the end of the tunnel and that my situation wasn't permanent. That one day when I was old enough, I could break free. I did just that, and I started seeing a therapist when I got to college. I still have a hard time opening up and expressing my feelings, but I have gotten better over the years. Thank you to all the teachers who see the little things and get kids the help they need. They may not say it, but it means the world to them that you gave them so much to hope for. Story 23. I'm a student teacher at a school where over 90% of the students are at risk. My mentor teacher and I were noticing one student was falling asleep consistently every day, regardless of the activity we were doing. My mentor's teacher asked him to step into the hall to talk about what's going on, and she found out that he wasn't getting any sleep at his foster home because there were 4 children under 3 in the home and he shared a room with a baby with colic. Then we found out that he had been wrongfully removed from the free and reduced lunch program and had been starving all week long. The poor kid had no energy at all. When we called the foster parents, they said the exact same thing, and it turns out they had taken him in because the only other place that had an opening was a group home for severely disturbed or children with extreme behavioral issues. Administrators are looking into why he was removed, and now he's got his own secret cabinet in the class, full of snacks, and he can come get him at any time. He is also allowed to come in during our off period to work on homework or take a quick nap. He is a wonderful student and an awesome kid, and it's awful that he has to go through that. It's really a testament to how awesome my mentor teacher and what a difference a teacher can make in the lives of a student. Please adopt older children. They need homes too, and the system seems to give up once they hit a certain age. Story 24. First time meeting the parents as they didn't show up to meet and greet or open house. Their kid is struggling in everything, and the parents are near impossible to get a hold of. The kid is violent towards other students and requires nonstop attention from me. Parents deny everything. That is not their student. They don't act like this at home. We put him in judo lessons to exercise his energy. He continues to be a pest in my class and actually causes a student to beg their parents to leave the school. He continually would approach the student and say how he was stupid or dumb or gay and smelled. The student lasted 4 days in my program. Despite all my attempts to making sure they were never close to each other, the student would find a way when lining up, in specials classes, out during recess to torture the other student. Remember the parents talking about judo classes? Funny thing is, the next week he uses a judo hold on another student in the playground and almost chokes him out. Cut to the meeting in the admin office with his parents, his therapist, which no one knew he had until the choking incident, me, the principal, and vice principal. He is given a stay-at-home suspension and will be monitored when he returns to school. Parents still deny everything, and then I bring up judo classes. I explained how he had the student in a chokehold. They didn't say anything. Then it was our fault. We weren't doing enough for him. We don't have enough services. We don't. Our school isn't for everyone. We aren't public, so we aren't afforded all the resources and employees. That we don't like him. We had a day off the following week. I come back from my day away and he was pulled out of the school. The kid was a kid. He's 6 years old. He had glimpses of happiness and could apply himself when he wanted to, but he will keep being enabled by his parents to be as violent and hurtful to others as he wants because he can. Story 25. My first year teaching, I had a 7th grade girl that would try to flirt with me and one day actually propositioned to have sex with me. I let her know that was incredibly inappropriate, explained the age difference and student-teacher relationship boundaries that should never be crossed. After talking with the principal, I learned that her dad left the family years ago and was completely out of the picture. This combined with and caused her to have a really low self-esteem, and she frequently responded this way to males that were nice to her and paid attention to her. The principal and I wanted to have a meeting with her and her mother, but it turned out her mom was out of town. So I set out to speak to her older sister, a freshman in college, when she came to pick her up. Within 5 minutes of meeting the sister, she started flirting with me and asked me out, saying, "I would love to take care of you since you have been so nice to my sister." As with her younger sister, I informed her that I was not interested and asked to have her mom call me as soon as she could. About a week later, her mom came into my classroom to speak with me, and within 5 minutes, she starts hitting on me, licking her lips, suggestively putting her hand on my shoulder and trying to rub my leg. She then says, "We don't really have to involve the principal in this, do we? Maybe you and I could just go out for some drinks and make this whole thing go away." I also let her know that I was not interested and that we really need to talk this over with the principal and the guidance counselor. Look, I'm not exactly what you would call a looker by any means. I'm a perfectly average-looking guy, I guess, and have never had this type of attention, but did have a girlfriend who is now my wife at the time. It was just insane to see this entire family of females who were so lonely and in need of any positive attention from males that they would flirt with any guy who was nice to them. Story 26. Student here. So basically, I didn't have an easy life. I was the unwanted child of my entire family. My external family made this very clear to me when I was younger. They had given my mother the advice to abort me or put me up for adoption. My mom said no, thus, ta-da! I'm here 20 years later. Because I was born, however, the rest of my family turned their backs to our little branch of the family up until I was 5. My mom, being the strong lady that she is, worked 2 jobs to provide a roof over our heads and food in our tummies. So a few years ago, the school figured out that I was a smart butt and moved me up a few grades and gave me accelerated classes. I didn't really care much for them at the time. This made my mom happy, so who was I to take that happiness away from her? Anyway, come 6th grade, and I had been working hard to get into a gifted program that the district provides. Problem is that it required a lot of money, but they offered me a scholarship so long as my grades were at the top of my year. I had a crappy history teacher who reprimanded me after asking a question on an assignment, and told 10-year-old me, "Yeah, you'll never get into the program with these grades," and dropped my grade from an A to a B. I now know that he couldn't do that, but at the time, I didn't. So I'm now crapping bricks, not knowing how it'll affect all the hard work I've put in. My external family comes into the picture and tries to buy my love through gifts that I didn't like, toys that I didn't want, and other trinkets. Finally, my aunt offers to pay the tuition of the program. This, however, was a double-edged sword, given that it gave her the right to loom it over my mother. My mother, however, was desperate and was willing to accept it. I told her not to, and that it would be okay if I didn't get it. I asked my teacher if I could do extra credit or something. He said no, because it was my fault for being a bad student. He even went as far as to say I was a bad kid for not being able to understand the assignment. I had finally reached my limit and worked my little 10-year-old butt to get a better grade and to show them all. Funny 10-year-old mentality. A few months later, I got a letter saying my entire tuition was covered and I had been accepted. I took the letter to school that day and showed it to my history teacher and told him, "You were wrong," and left. My mom showed it to my aunt and got to gloat a little. So to my family at that time, who thankfully somewhat changed for the better, and that crappy history teacher, here I am, a full-time college student. I have a full-time job since freshman year, and I'm graduating next year in the top 5% of my year and have been offered positions at high-end companies. To all of you, I have to say, you were wrong about me. Story 27. Not a teacher and not necessarily exactly what this topic's asking, but I'll throw it in anyway because it's kind of there. I coached a lot of youth flag football for volunteer hours in high school and continued in college. Anyway, I had one kid who was in an orphanage and all the parents and teachers basically told me to watch out for. Like, oh, let us know if he does anything. We've already warned him not to do anything at practice. The other kids know to tell us, etc. And there were a few times where he'd have to miss practice or games because of something he did at school. But while he did your normal kid stuff like goofing off or not listening or whatever, it wasn't very much more than anyone else on the team, and I never had a problem with him. Anyway, we're at a football game, and he pulls a personal foul or something or other. It was a flag, so the personal foul can come from running into someone or getting tripped up or basically any contact the ref decides he doesn't want to let go, and one of the dads comes over and literally starts berating him for pulling the personal foul. I was busy doing my coaching thing, sending in plays, making sure kids subbed, game still going, and all that. So I didn't realize it was happening until I heard the kid yelling back at this adult. Suddenly it all clicked that this young man simply acted the way he was treated and wasn't allowed to make a mistake because he was labeled as a bad kid. Anyway, I told the dad to screw off and never talk to one of my kids again like that. Really awkward to have that conversation with someone's parent, by the way. And I told the kid not to pay attention to him and to only listen to me and to focus on the game because he was going back in soon. I always felt really bad for him after that. I think he's in jail now for being in a gang. Also, bonus points, he was black and was often the only black kid on either team. Second fun bonus comment, when I coached him in basketball, he was by far called for more questionable fouls than anyone else on the team. One time 3 kids collided going for the ball. It's youth sports, they do stupid crap. And as they all got up out of the pile, only he got a foul for it. For those of you who don't play basketball, fouls are a big deal because they carry automatic ejections and give the other team free throws after a certain amount. Anyway, I was so upset I called the ref a racist from across the court at the top of my lungs. He never got a foul called on him again after that. Story 28. I teach 9th grade world history in Los Angeles. Most of the time I would meet a parent and it would give me much needed insight into the child's behavior and motivations. However, I did have this one student whose parents made me fear for humanity. The kid himself was actually quite bright and driven, however he was extremely contrary to instruction, never completing work, and generally acted like an a-hole with a distinct lack of empathy towards others. He was given an individualized education plan, what people in the USA use to identify any special needs students might have, that labeled oppositional defiance. In the USA, IEPs are treated like diseases, that he is a victim of this disease that is plaguing him and that he should not be held accountable if he steals or lies or hurts or cheats. I bought into this until I met his parents. Sweet baby Jesus, was that an experience. They were the biggest douchebags ever I had ever met on this planet. They made no appointment. I barged into my room, commanded the parents I was meeting with at the time that it was their time to talk, and proceeded to blame everyone else for the fact that their child had not completed a single assignment that year and would have to repeat the grade. He was not this poor soul plagued with a mental illness that made him act against his wishes. He was just raised an a-hole from crap a-hole parents. This made me mad not only as his F-head parents for deciding to reproduce, but also at the American special educational system for describing him with a diagnosis rather than actually diagnosing him. He continues to use his diagnosis as an entitlement to do as he pleases and continues to get away with it, all because of his idiot parents. Story 29. Not a teacher, but a coach. Kid I thought was quiet or shy found out after meeting the parents the player was horrified at the idea of making a mistake. It clicked when his father started talking about his goal of getting his son a scholarship. The kid was 11. There was one goal. Kid that had a pretty nasty temper met the mother who informed me that the father was in jail for assault. 15 years for assault? That's a crap ton of assault. Had a 10-year-old that was a beast, just loved contact. Came back the following season and he would not put himself in harm's way. Found out that at the end of the last season his father died. About 9 months later his mother was dating a guy that really took interest in the player. He died suddenly. 6 years later and the kid is scared to death of his own shadow, convinced he could be killed at any moment. Single hardest parent meeting I ever had to have was with his mother, and she was just broken. Kid that yelled nonstop. He would make a mistake and clap his hands and politely say, "Okay team, we got this." If someone else made a mistake, he would lose his mind. He would be uncontrollable for a solid 30 seconds. Met his parents at a meet and greet and they argued the entire time, just nitpicking at everything the other person did. I ended up testifying in the custody battle several years later. But by far the worst parent interaction I ever had, and hands down my top all-time, "oh, that explains a lot" moment, a player was always sick, blowing his nose when it was very clear he was not stuffed up or had a runny nose. After every play, he would lay on the ground holding his leg, arm, head, or groin. Every week, he would show up to practice at least once claiming an injury and could not do contact. Twice, he was out sick for several weeks, and on occasion, I visited the kid in the hospital. At the parent meet and greet, his mother would not stop wiping his nose. At one point, he crawled up in her lap and laid his head on her. She cradled him like a baby. He was 13 and rocked him, continuing to wipe his nose. She stopped our conversation and asked if he was feeling okay. He looked at her and to me appears frightened and said he felt fine. Over the next 20 minutes, she asked him over and over until he finally said his tummy hurt. 13 years old, I will remind you. At that point, I knew something very unhealthy was going on. Knowing the principal at the school, I made a call the following morning. While he could not say much, he indicated they were fully aware of the situation. The next season, the player was back, but living with his aunt. In just over 8 months from now, the kid will be getting a free education in exchange for playing rugby at one of the top universities in the U.S. I love coaching. The things these boys put themselves through for sport is amazing. Watching them grow has been a fascinating experience, but holy crap, do some of the parents suck at parenting. Story 30. I teach in the inner city, so I rarely meet parents. When I do, there is little to be surprised about, and you can often see the apple does not fall far from the tree. Last year, I had a student who was grossly obese in just the 10th grade, probably pushing 350 pounds, and listed as disabled for a minor surgery that had occurred many years ago. The disabled status allowed him to be even lazier and move as slow as he wanted. In fact, we were told to let him leave class 10 minutes early and arrive 10 minutes late to a class. A grand total of 17 minutes out of class as the other students only have 3 minutes with the bell. He didn't turn in a single homework assignment all year, failed every test, and didn't even try to make excuses. He just said, "Don't have it," or "Don't care." I am required by law to have a parent-teacher conference, and every one his mother had a litany of excuses. Everything from, "He is disabled," to, "He needs to be in special ed." The school nurse already told the mother his disability had nothing to do with his cognitive abilities, and the school psychologist said he had nothing wrong with him except being lazy. The mother, herself grossly obese, also wore a traffic safety vest to every meeting as she had a fear of cars. After informing the mother that I was failing her son for the year in our last parent-teacher conference, she accused me of being a thief who stole her son's homework and was trying to get him kicked out of the school. She eventually transferred him to a special needs school known for taking anyone on government assistance and willing to have their child classified. I do not miss this kid at all. Story 31. My wife told me about a student that was always having anxiety or behavior issues at school. She was trying everything to support him and get him feeling okay with what he needed to do and how to organize things. Then he would go back to being upset and frantic about his work, and then my wife, after getting him straightened out emotionally yet again, found him frantic in the morning when he was dropped off one day. She got to see how his mother was reacting. The student's mother had an anxiety problem that she was projecting onto her son, who was all of the age 10 or 11 and didn't know what the issue was. Once my wife saw this, she realized it wasn't what she was doing with the kid that was causing the issue, but how his mother was emotionally destabilizing him. She changed her tactics and had things sorted out in about a week. My wife brings this victory up when she talks about dealing with her difficult students. She has also dealt with a prince that can do no wrong. The child was flat out lying, big whoopers that any adult would immediately question, but both his parents would take them as fact and go after her and the administration. Finally, after a lie even I could see, the parents pulled their kid. The last story I have is of a child that was having trouble from a previous school. Behavior was all wrong for the kid. Principal and my wife had many talks with the parents about trying to normalize the kid, and after 3 months, we're getting nowhere. Finally, in a meeting one day, one parent mentioned the difficulty in packing the boys' things up every 3 days because the parents were divorcing and the kid had been traveling between the two homes every 3 days for months. Principal read them the riot act for withholding crucial information about a child's circumstance and then booted them from the school. My wife has told me that she can look at a child and can tell if they have one parent, checked out parents, or good parents, all based on how the child behaves. Story 32. I actually was the kid. I was the accident baby that threw a wrench into my parents' lives, and both of them came from abusive homes, so they reacted the way they knew how. I would show up to class with bruises, saying they were from fights, which was believable because I was always starting or jumping into fights at school. That continued into middle school, where I either slept or goofed off in class, never did my homework, and pulled assignments out of my butt at the last minute. I usually got A's too. Then I just decided I wasn't going to high school and didn't show up to the first day. Fast forward 2 years and I'm a landscaper. We finish our job and start packing up to go home. And as the only native English speaker, it was my duty to go and talk to the owner, and they turned out to be one of my elementary school teachers. I mentioned that I thought I'd been in her class in 5th grade, and we had a quick conversation where she asked how old I was now, and I said I was 16. Something must have set off alarm bells for her to see a 16-year-old skipping school to mow her lawn because she gave me her number and said to call her if I wanted to talk to someone. A couple months later, I'd overstayed my welcome at my friend's parents' house and had to go back home. Quit my job because at that point in my life I couldn't hold down anything consistent and picked up a part-time janitor thing at Walmart. One day I'm looking for a reason to not go back to my parents' house, so I called my old teacher. She picked me up from Walmart and we went to McDonald's and just talked. I think she sensed I was trying to avoid going home because she sat there going through some long pauses and random bullcrap conversations. Then she took me home because she needed to get home and take care of her family. So she drops me off and my mom comes out of the house screaming about some crap I don't remember and immediately throws a punch at my face. I explained to the teacher over text that I just put up with her because it's better than fighting back and having to deal with Dad. She did her level best after that to keep me out of that house. She helped me get back on track and wind up as a supervisor at Walmart for a while before I enlisted. So if Mrs. Simmons is reading this, I really hope she knows how much I appreciate her. Story 33. Student here, not teacher. Wanted to share anyway because I think they got the click easily when others did. I went to 2 different schools. One was crap. I couldn't read or do math. Nada. At home was a savage fend-for-yourself environment. No food in the cupboards, dirty clothes, dirty hair, sleeping on the floor with like 5 other kids type deal. Ditched with my grandparents. Sick grandpa, abusive grandma. No rules, but random beatings and beratings for behavior we weren't taught was wrong. No bedtime, no set meals. 1 year for a school picnic, I literally brought bread with just condiments. It was pretty effing depressing. I got basically railroaded by that school into a special ed program for my start years. They called me lazy, etc., and yelled at me when I'd fall asleep in class. My mom then met some douchebag, and I got put in a new school a while away. He beat me and berated me pretty much over every little thing, including not knowing how to read or do math. At first, they stuck me in the special kids program and couldn't figure out what was going on because my IQ testing apparently showed I wasn't even on the low end. I never acted out, but I never really had any friends. I cried all the time. I'd get angry and lash out over math. I'd shut down, mute. Kids bullied me so badly because I was always gangly. It hit about 3rd grade, and something must have happened because they took a huge interest in me and my well-being. I'm assuming they met my mother and stepfather and saw how young she was and how old and crappy he was. He wouldn't have held back about talking me down. They taught me to read, the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me in this world. They took me out of the special kids program and they got me to teach other kids who struggled to read. I spent my morning of 30 to 60 minutes of reading time teaching other kids who couldn't read. They offered to teach me to tie my shoes. They told me all kinds of things I never heard at home and encouraged me. They took off my training wheels. One day I came to school and I broke down. I had just gotten a beating that morning, but it wasn't any worse than usual. I just wasn't calmed down from it yet. I'll always remember the teacher asking me if I was okay and then putting her sweater around my shoulders. They called CPS and I got to finish my time at that school before my mom was basically told she'd have to move away from him or lose all her kids. It didn't stop him from being around and being abusive emotionally, but he never put his hands on me again. Forever grateful for whatever clicked for them when the others didn't give a crap. Looking at it, if I saw a kid who acted like that, I'd know something was wrong and I'd reach out. Obviously, whatever the others were missing, this school had it. My success is definitely due to them and all they did for me. Gosh dang it, Reddit. Oh, I love that. Story 34. I was that kid in high school. Very smart, but failing everything because of my crappy home life. My parents were divorced and my life was awesome while I was living with my mom, but her health was rapidly declining because of MS, and my father convinced my mom to let me come and live with him. My dad was an alcoholic, and his apartment was a bachelor with a pull-out couch with a second couch that didn't pull out. As a teenage girl, the lack of privacy was horrible. As soon as I moved in, my dad started making me babysit for the waitresses at his favorite pub and then stole all my money to spend on booze. The first year I lived with him, we moved 9 times, usually into some crappy motel until he didn't pay the rent and then we'd move somewhere else. My clothes were never clean unless I crammed some into my school backpack and took them to where I babysat and did laundry. I was so embarrassed by what was going on at home that when social workers pulled me out of class to talk to me, I denied that there were any problems. I couldn't bring myself to tell them that my dad got physically violent when he was drunk, that most days all I had to eat was an apple until I babysat and could eat supper with the kids I was looking after, or that most nights I didn't get home until 3 a.m. after the pub closed. I was tired all the time. My high school guidance counselor was so kind to me that when she'd call me into her office to talk, all I could do was cry. I never did tell her what was going on at home, but I think she knew. Eventually, my dad threw me out, and I ended up living with a friend's family while I finished high school. The stability alone allowed me to go from failing everything to winning a college bursary. Not being hungry, tired, and hit all the time allowed me to blossom academically. I only wish I'd opened up to my counselor about the real reason I was failing, because once I was finally out of that situation, my life was infinitely better. Story 35. Last year I had a student who defies all expectations, although in the area I work in he sadly was not that unusual. This kid finally showed up to school weeks late into the year. He was a repeat 7th grader at the age of 15. My kids were not the most well-behaved, but he took it to another level. Hand him a paper or test and he would curse you out and throw it to the ground. Try to lecture and he would scream in Spanglish, rap curses, yell the entire period just to get you to stop. He called me, students, administrators, and even respected teachers terrible names and used mother effing bad words to describe everyone. He was unbearable. He destabilized any classroom, harassed kids, and no matter what we tried to do, he never responded. Ultimately, we would call his mom about sending him to another school where he could get more support if he needs. And that is when I cried for him. This student was a terror, but as his mother walked in with a strong smell, very pregnant, wearing very worn clothing, I finally got a sense of this boy's home environment. And even when his mom came to speak to us, she quickly degenerated into barely comprehensible speech broken into Spanish full of curse words and derogatory names. In front of the teacher, she called her son some of the nastiest words I have ever heard, and he cried and cried and cried. He's one of 11 kids. His father is somewhere in Pennsylvania with another family. The mom's only income is child welfare. One time he had a rotten tooth left in his mouth for months, and we had to threaten to call CPS to take him away before he got dental care. His favorite time of the year was January, when his mom gets tax returns so he could buy new shoes. He loves school despite his attitude. It's the only place he ever gets any love or attention. Story 37. Obligatory, not a teacher. Neighbor's kid was 12, ran wild and insane, really rude to my younger kids, 8 and 4. Her younger sister was a little hyper, but okay. Her mom shows up on my doorstep at 3 in the morning, wide awake, and asks to use my phone. I ask if everything is okay because it's effing 3 in the morning and she's been knocking on my door forever like her life is ending. She said she's fine, with a look like, why would anything be wrong? I hand her my phone and she calls someone. I wait back inside because I am patient and not nosy. She brings back my phone a few minutes later and thanks me, acting like nothing is unusual about this. The next day I get a call back. Some girl is screaming at me about calling her boyfriend. I said I didn't call anyone. She says my number is on his phone, and I tell her the neighbor used my phone. She said she's going to come find me and beat my butt while calling me a liar. I tell her, come on over. I have a .45 with your name on it, and I'm a marksman. Could use some more target practice. She hangs up. Never hear from her again. That night, another neighbor, big drug addict, informs me that the first neighbor has told her kids that I spy on them and tell her everything they do. I can tell now it's a real effed up situation. I go over and talk to the 12-year-old, tell her if she needs a place to go, she can come see me whenever. And that's how I got my 6th kid. Long story short, the other kid is still with her mom. She tested positive for many hard drugs, but apparently CPS doesn't think that's a big deal. The reason I have one and not the other is because they have different dads and her dad took custody of her, but she lives with me. It's a long story. She has nothing to do with her mom or little sister. Her little sister has been coached into guilt-tripping her every time she comes around, and it's too hard on her. You know, I know we only have one side of the story, but it's a reoccurring theme where someone goes, yeah, we told CPS about these beatings or drugs or whatever, and they just thought it was no problem. I'm not too familiar with it, but is the Child Protective Services like a problem? Is that something that goes on, or am I just maybe reading too much into this? Story 38. I work as a paraeducator at a school for children with autism. I help in the classroom with all of the students, but my main focus is one high-functioning 10-year-old girl. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah lied a lot and was extremely manipulative. If one staff member told her she couldn't do or have something, she would ask other staff to try and get the response she wanted. Sarah loathed schoolwork and would do everything in her power to get out of it. Sarah's weakness, however, is candy. If she has a good attitude, participates, and does a reasonable amount of work, she can earn candy every class period. So one day she tells me first thing in the morning that she is sick and can't possibly do her work. I let her know that if she is sick, then I can't give her candy today because that will make it worse. She agreed to this and ends up having a pretty good day and would have earned candy if she hadn't lied about being sick. She got picked up early that day, and just before her mom came in, Sarah said she felt better and could have her candy now. I told her she couldn't have it because the sickness wasn't cured after just a few hours. Cue the meltdown. She is screaming about how big of a female dog I am and how she hates me. She tried to hit me just as her mom came in. Mom hugs the daughter and asks her what happened. Sarah said that I was being unfair and not giving her the candy that she earned. I interject and tell the mom about Sarah's sickness. Mom asks Sarah if she lied to get out of work, and she admits it. Mom then tells me that since Sarah admitted to the lie, she deserves the candy and I need to give it to her. Way to go, lady. You just taught your daughter that she can lie and still get rewarded. The whole situation boils my blood when I think of it. Story 39. Worked for local parks and recreation. We had an after-school program for 2nd and 8th graders from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. This one boy just, your typical bad kid. He was about 11, he cursed a lot, broke equipment, teased other kids, never listened. One time he climbed a tree and stayed up there for hours, refusing to come down. Just irritating crap like that, right? I couldn't watch him in a tree and another 20 kids inside the building doing their homework. He just made things very difficult. But he had a sweetness about him. I let him slide too much, I know, but I felt terrible for him because I knew it stemmed from something. I found out his mom was a foster mom. This woman never interacted with me and would tell me to call the cops if he didn't listen when I'd call her, when he was exceptionally bad. She had about 5 other foster kids. The next year he was back. He was telling me about his new mom and how he shared a room with 4 other boys. Like every year, this boy was calling another woman mom, and he'd call them on the phone and I'd hear him tell these women he loved them. Then he'd be in another home months later. I don't know how the system works. I don't know if this situation is typical, but I hated seeing it. He just wanted security, permanency. I actually looked him up on Facebook a year or so ago. This was 10 years ago when I worked there. His profile pic was exactly as you'd imagine it would be. I think he had a gun in one picture. I wanted to cry. You drove me bananas, Zach, but I cared deeply for you. 10 years later, I still wish the best for you, kiddo. Story 40. I'm going to get a lot of crap for this, but here it goes. I was teaching a high school sophomore class. There were 2 young girls, actually, that were quite attractive. Let's call the first one Edith. When Edith started making comments about my looks and inappropriate gestures in class, I had to call a meeting with her and her parents one night. The next day, nothing changed. It actually got worse because her friend, let's call her Kate, started competing for my attention. So one day, Kate would make comments in front of students, and then the next day, Edith would do it. No matter how many times they were confronted, it would continue until they were eventually removed from my classroom. Fast forward 3 years later, I finished my master's degree and go on to teach at the college level. Guess who I run into? Edith. Except she's all grown up and looking fantastic. I'm a male in my early 30s and decided, what the heck, it's acceptable in college, so I bring up what a pain in the butt she was and we laugh about it. She asked me out to coffee to make it up to me. We go out, have a great conversation as she explains a lot about her life and the changes she made since her sophomore year. I was really impressed how much she had matured. Like a scumbag, I agreed to have dinner with her one night. Fast forward to date night, the plan was to meet Edith at a pretty cool restaurant, and I head over and arrive 30 minutes early to grab a drink and calm the nerves, and quiet the dang angel on my shoulder. As I'm sitting at the bar looking over the whiskey menu, I hear a haunting voice from behind the bar. It was Kate. She had clearly recognized me and takes my order. Without me saying anything, Kate goes on to this long apology about how she treated me in high school. I laugh it off and we chat a bit. She asks, why am I there? And I tell her I'm on a date, but do not mention that I'm meeting Edith. I must have sat there chatting for longer than expected, but Kate slips me her number across the table. I am hesitant. At that time, Edith walks up, sees me reaching for the number, locks eyes with Kate, and crap gets super awkward. I get up to direct Edith to the table, and she shoves me, full-blown bully shoves me into the bar stool, and she starts yelling at Kate. They yell and yell and yell, and Kate comes from behind the bar. I can't even do the scene justice here, but I will try. You have these 2 gorgeous 20-year-olds catfighting like we're on World Star. Edith has this low-cut top miniskirt and Kate was white low-cut shorts and a tank top. They're ripping each other's clothes off and cursing about high school and how Kate betrayed Edith and drove us apart. Sisters don't do that to each other. Apparently they were sisters and had a falling out over it. I try to leave the restaurant when the manager pulls me aside and has this menacing look on her face. She angrily breaks up the fight, screams at Edith to leave, and tells Kate to get her butt back behind the bar. She turns to me, and it hits me who this woman is. It's their mother. She grabs me by the collar and screams, "You can't have your Kate and Edith too!" Oh my gosh, was this one long story for that stupid pun? Was none of that real? Honestly, probably for the better. I didn't like at the beginning how he's like, yeah, these two students who were honestly quite attractive and gorgeous. It was all pretty gross, so you know what? If this is fake, hey, hats off to you. Story 41. Similar situation, though I must open up with not a teacher. My mom was a teacher for 35 years, so I'm sure she has some stories including a lawsuit a parent brought against her. They lost, but I digress. I'm recently married and now a stepdad to 2 elementary school-aged kids. We moved to a condo community a few months ago and the kids made some neighborhood friends. My daughter comes home crying one Saturday afternoon. It turns out one of the neighborhood kids, who is actually younger than her, told her she was going to kill her or something. She was bullying my daughter into doing things she didn't want to, and all the while threatening her. I went to the park and found this kid. I didn't tell, didn't swear, didn't threaten. I wanted to see what the real deal was. As soon as she learned who I was, she fell to her knees crying and begging me not to tell her parents. Well, I go to her house and knock on the door, asking to speak with a parent. A sloppy, dirty, probably drunk man in a wife beater answers the door and says he is her stepdad. By this time, she had come in the house from the back and went to the entryway where I spoke to him. She immediately started crying when she saw me, and that was when it all clicked. The stepdad just laid into her, not hitting but a lot of yelling and what I considered to be borderline abusive. I mean, if he talks to her in front of strangers like that, how bad is it behind closed doors? I felt horrible, but at the same time, I will not allow her to verbally assault my daughter and threaten her life. This is a kid who is always happy and joyful and up and about, and let some kid with an effed up home life take it out on her. But I was able to see why this little girl acted out the way she did. I hope that she and her siblings are not being hit, and I hope they aren't subjected to horrible abuse. I don't know for sure, so I can't report any of it, but if this guy ever yells at my daughter, I will destroy his life. Story 42. I was a substitute teacher for 1.5 years. There was this strange girl in class. No friends, never smiled, excellent student. She was never late and always did her assignments meticulously. Homework often done well before time. She was hopelessly out of the loop and didn't understand common references to TV shows that all the kids watched. So, as a substitute teacher, I wasn't on track to meet her parents, but the school hosted an event of the dangers of walking without reflexes on roads. She comes in with her mother and father, and there is just nothing strange about them except that they seem a bit out of the current fashion. So we, the teachers, and the students and their parents all hang out around the cafeteria waiting for everyone to show up. I knew she was interested in physics, which was what I taught. Sometimes she asked really insightful questions, but always in private after classes. So I thought I should say hello and introduce myself. After talking with them for 5 minutes, it all became so very clear. Her parents were very strict. Jehovah's Witnesses, no TV, no radio, no birthdays or Christmas or other festivities that weren't directly tied to their religious beliefs. She had nothing in common with the other children. She was 14 at this time, I think. I actually wrote her a letter of recommendation some years ago. She still had my email and asked if I could write one for her. She had a hard time finding a place for future studies due to her parents' strict upbringing, and she didn't believe that evolution happened or that the Earth is older than 10,000 years. I'm fairly sure she continued to study since the dean of one of the universities she applied to called me with some questions regarding her. I think I dispelled her fears. Story 43. Not a teacher, but this fits well here. One of my roommates for the past 2 years really irked me occasionally. He's a really cool guy and we hang out fairly frequently now, but when we were living together, it felt like he was constantly running back to mommy and daddy to fix his problems. Thing was that he was an absolute crap to them when interacting with them. This, coupled with the fact that he was prone to depression and pretty serious anxiety attacks, which landed him in the hospital 2 or 3 times during the time we were living together, meant that they were a fairly big part of his life. He was 25 when we stopped living together, and our relationship had gone downhill a bit because the way he interacted with his parents showed itself occasionally towards other people. Mental health issues aside, his behavior occasionally seemed like it was just attention-seeking, which in hindsight he probably was. I just didn't understand where all this was coming from. It should be noted that up to the point where he moved out, I'd only met his father once, and he seemed like a fairly normal dude. All of the roommates had heard stories about how his whole family was super dysfunctional, but we just couldn't understand how. His dad was a doctor with his own practice, pulling in dump trucks of money a year, and had provided for his family really well. On the surface, it seemed like they should have been really good. Oh boy, was I so wrong. I graduated college a year earlier than the roommate in question. I met his parents and 23-year-old high-functioning autistic brother on the day he graduated after they had left the ceremony early to start moving his stuff out of the house. We went to a small liberal arts college in Minnesota, so it wasn't like the ceremony was any longer than an hour and a half, but they apparently needed to get a jump start on moving. It was during the moving process that everything just clicked. Moving is never a fun process. Lifting heavy, bulky crap from all over 2 floors of a house to the truck will get the best of everyone, especially so on a hot, early summer day in Minnesota. This clearly was not part of the problem in this case. After letting them in and exchanging pleasantries, I retreated to my computer on the 2nd floor and witnessed the most dysfunctional moving attempt on the planet. Oh my gosh, the yelling. Everything was a matter of life and death and needed to be indicated by shrill tones of voice and volume. Someone missed a step carrying a couch down the stairs, which halted all moving for like 10 minutes while they attempted to assess the situation. At one point, his brother saw my cat, which had been living in the house for 5 months at that point, and exclaimed that he was deathly allergic and the cat needed to leave. That halted things for another 10 minutes. Spoiler, no one died from cat exposure. The roommate appeared at some point in this whole process fairly upset that his parents bailed early and then proceeded to, I would say smartly, completely get out of moving by saying he was feeling faint from the heat and needed to lie down. All of this was experienced by me from my computer chair. I'm a fairly level-headed guy and it takes quite a bit to shake me. I have never been so uncomfortable and anxious in my entire life. I can only imagine what 25 years of this would do to a human. Turns out that it turns you into my roommate. When his parents were out of earshot at one point, I apologized for not being as understanding as I could have been with all of his issues. He looked at me deadpan and just asked what they did. I had to explain that it wasn't so much anything that they had done, but instead that they just were. Our relationship has greatly improved since my revelation from this 2-hour event. It just boggles my mind how dysfunctional this seemingly normal family is. It's not like he can get away from it either, as he's still a bit dependent on them for insurance and the like. I straight up told him that he'd be better off completely cutting them off, but that's only my outside perspective and can't realistically expect him to do that. Sorry for the wall of text. Story 44. This is probably going to get buried, but I have so many aha moments after meeting parents of my students. I'm an elementary teacher. Last year, there was a 4th grade student who was continually disrespectful. He would argue with you until he was blue in the face, refuse to do his work, literally roll around on the floor yelling that he hated his class. And I'm an art teacher. My class is supposed to be fun. He would also get up, walk out of the room, and slam the door if he was really upset, as you were trying with every ounce of patience you had to get him to do something. I talked with his homeroom teacher, and she had the same struggles, so I decided to sit in on his first parent-teacher conference. In walks Dad. To say he was the most arrogant person I've ever met would be nice. He sat down, demanded to see every piece of evidence that his son was misbehaving. I took a video of one of his temper tantrums rolling on the floor, thank goodness, and pointed his finger at us, blaming us for his son's behavior because, "I don't allow him to behave like this at home. You shouldn't either. So it's your fault he behaves like this because you just let him." He argued with us for a full 30 minutes, and at the end of it, he got up, walked out the door, and slammed it. Like father, like son. Story 45. Not a teacher, but a mom. I have 2 kids, a 6-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. They have a friend who lives in the same complex we live in, another 6-year-old girl. Her mom works all the time and is rarely home. I get along with the girl's uncle and had met the mom a few times. I felt sorry for this little girl and would have her come over to my house and a lot to spend time with her and give her a positive experience. She gets ignored a lot. She is also a huge brat. Instead of saying, "I need a break," she will yell, "I hate you, you're stupid." I don't allow that in my house and have tried so often to explain to her that it is hurtful and she won't be welcome at my house anymore if she continues to treat my kids like that. Normally, she would say those things to my 6-year-old son, but one day she read the riot act to my 3-year-old daughter. My daughter comes inside crying and just broken. This other girl is her best friend and is screaming that she hates my daughter. I had enough. I didn't say anything, just took her hand and took her home. I told her uncle what had happened, again, and left. He told me later that he had grounded her for a few days so she can learn the impact of her words. Okay, cool. 2 days later, her mom comes home and immediately comes to my house screaming, "How dare I punish her daughter? Why haven't my kids been playing with her? Oh, I thought she was grounded." And the kids are just always mean and I just need to teach my kids to deal with it. Seriously? I watch your child for free, lady. It is my own dang house. I get to choose how my kids are raised, and she blames me for my kids being sensitive rather than having a conversation with her daughter about bullying. My kids don't really play with her anymore. This mom has also tried to spread rumors about how terrible I am. No one is buying it, and I feel bad for that little girl. Story 46. When I worked after school at a daycare, and their summer camp in following years, there was this girl I knew from ages 6 to 10. She had a lot of behavioral issues. During her worst period around age 6 and 7, she would bite, kick, yell, and violently threaten students, sometimes threatening to kill them. She apparently beat up her little sister at night, so her parents started locking her in her room at night. Her teacher at the time was able to get her into therapy, which helped a lot with the violent behavior, but she was still a volatile child. Over the years, I continued to see a remarkable improvement in her behavior. I was proud of her, and I told her that. She rarely gave me trouble. She really was a very bright and sweet kid underneath her troubles. But I did not meet her parents until she was 9 and started staying in aftercare regularly. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. This little girl had improved, as I said, but she had her days when she would act up and be hard-headed. Those days were always accompanied by her coming into my room looking sad and down, or growing sad near the end of the evening when her mom was going to pick her up. When I met her mom, she seemed to resent her kids. She was instantly impatient with them, dismissive, and wouldn't get off her dang cell phone to listen as they tried to tell her about their day. She pretended she was in such a rush, but this woman would sit in the parking lot for 1 to 3 hours every night, reading magazines or talking on her phone until the last minute daycare was open. Like a switch, her little girl's behavior would do a 180. I wanted to cry sometimes seeing how much her little girl had improved, how she eagerly wanted to tell her mom how good she had been all week and what she had done at school, only to be met with an icy irritation that drove her back into her bad attitude. When I met her father, he was similarly rude, ignoring his kids, being irritated and impatient, not giving a crap about anything the teacher said, good or bad. She would be in high school now, and I still think about her and her sister. I hope they're okay. Story 47. I'm another one with the terribly negative stories. I've worked as both a part-time teacher for summer school programs and as an after-school program teacher. But my biggest what the heck moment was before that, when I was working as an after-school tutor as part of a honors-level college program in what amounted to community service. We were working in a really poor area of town, had an old converted school building not attached to any particular school. Think of it like a pseudo-daycare center for after-school tutoring for kids whose parents would pick them up a few hours after school let out. Our students ran a range of ages, but mostly were late elementary through early middle school. There was this one kid I was working with who was really bright, generally well-behaved, at least in terms of he was never foul-mouthed or belligerent like some other kids can get. He pretty much hated studying and rarely paid attention, but he never really acted out in terms of interaction with the other kids. It was always a little strange to me, bright kid who loathed studying, when he was easily smart enough that he could do his assignments in no time at all, and have the rest of the time to himself if he'd just do it. His reading ability was especially poor for a kid his age. Well, one day he just kind of explodes with frustration because he wants to just ride around and draw instead of doing homework. Never did find out what was stressing him out that day, but because it was rather severe, he got the equivalent of detention. His parents came in the very next day to yell at us. In the ensuing argument, his parents actually say that he doesn't need to learn how to be good at math and that learning to read won't help him get ahead in life. That they, the parents, hadn't needed it and did fine for themselves. I was shocked. I mean, this is a couple that lived in a literal slum who seemed to honestly believe that education was pointless. It wouldn't help you get a better job so that you didn't need to live somewhere else like that. I'll admit, I'm from a reasonably well-off middle-class suburb. The fact that there are people out there who honestly believe education is pointless blew my mind. And it made it so clear why children's education is important, why working hard is as important, both as a teacher and if you're a student, and why some people's kids are so messed up in school. Their parents literally are telling them that they don't need to study. That in some cases it's not just neglect or bad parents spoiling their kids, it's that in some cases parents outright fight the whole concept of education. People sometimes jump on religious groups about protesting public education sex ed, but there are definitely worse forms that I've seen firsthand. I still have no idea why that kid was even in the program if his parents didn't think it was worth anything. My only guess to this day is that they basically used it like a daycare, since it wasn't exactly a safe area of town. So maybe they just wanted their kid to be somewhere other than at home alone or something. Story 48. I worked in a predominantly black school, 7th grade. I'm a white female, very young looking. I had one student that over time started talking too much. I asked him to stop. He would continue. He would switch seats every day. I told him to move back. Nope. At one point, I couldn't teach because he would not be quiet at all, talking to girls across the room. I had tried calling home prior to this, but no reply. So the next step was a write-up slip. He asked to go to the bathroom, and I said sure. He slams the door on his way out and called his mom in there. She calls the school asking why I'm mean to her son, why I don't like black people, why do I call him dumb, and said, I think he left a bad taste in your mouth the first week because he talked a lot, and now you're out to get him. She schedules a conference and doesn't show up. Her grammar is terrible. She's rude, expects me to hate him because he's black, requests to move him to another class, and guidance counselor says no, he's the problem, not the teacher. Also, I had written him a warning for cell phone use that same week. They liked taking photos of students and teachers and putting it on Instagram. Fast forward a few days and he doesn't make a peep, just sits there texting behind his book. I watch for a little while to be sure I'm seeing what I'm seeing, but he's so entranced by his text, he doesn't notice me close by. I come up and tell him quietly, I see you're texting. The school rule is second time the school has it for 48 hours. And all heck broke loose. He said he's not giving it to me, and I called security as he started mocking me, going, Do you really think you want to do that? When security finally arrives, he is screaming at me from the top of the table, yelling why I don't like black people. You're doing this because I'm black. I haven't done anything. That school was a mess, and he got moved to another class so I wouldn't have to deal with him. I left in March because that school freaking sucked, and his friends tried pulling the race card with their parents too. But to be fair, it was only happening all the white teachers. P.S. I'm not racist. If I was, then I would not have been teaching there. Story 49. I teach special ed and have had my fair share of these moments, but one in particular sticks out. I got a new student in the middle of last year, and for the first month or so, she would cry several times a day for no apparent reason, would tattle on other kids for things that didn't happen. They are 6th graders, so tattling should be a thing of the past, and basically melt down or give me the evil eye if I asked her to do any homework whatsoever. I talked to Mom over the phone about it, possibly the only way to reach her as she never seems to be at school, and was told she has anxiety. Totally not unusual for students in my class to have anxiety disorders, especially coupled with starting a new school. I figured she would settle in and make friends, and with some routine and behavioral supports, be okay. Then she started alienating all of the kids by being, well, not so nice. Again, most of my kids have issues with social skills, so I figured we would work on that like everyone else does. About a month in, her best friend was playing with another girl. These are possibly the two nicest and shyest little girls you could ever meet. So this new girl goes and tells some older kids crying that the two other girls are excluding her and called her names. The classroom aide was about 3 feet away and knows that this was a lie. The older kids come storming over and yell at the other two girls, and they just start bawling. After this, I decided to meet with the parents. I called home and we set up a meeting with this girl and her parents. For some reason, her grandpa also came to this meeting. As soon as they walked in the door, this girl starts bawling and saying she was being picked on. I know for a fact this isn't true because there are 3 adults that basically follow my kids around to make sure things like this don't happen. Her dad and grandpa immediately start in with the hugs. Oh, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. You are an angel and you won't be in trouble before the meeting even begins. Suddenly, everything makes sense. Parents, there's a difference between loving and supporting your kids and stunting them. With some strict rules and a lot of social skill work, the tears have stopped. She has legitimate friends and seems happier all around. At school, anyway. I hear home is much different. Wonder why. Story 50. Not a teacher, but had a really great teacher in graphics design in year 12 who I feel deserves a mention. Our class has a weird bunch of misfits, kids who had potential but were slack. Our teacher was brilliant. He never yelled, he never needed to. He made sure to get to know all of us from the get-go and earned our respect. Even the bratty kids with attitude died a little inside when he said they had disappointed him. Anyway, one of the boys, Dylan, in class hadn't handed in an assessment in time, which is pretty bad. He was a bright kid who was fairly lazy in class, but it was uncharacteristic to just not hand in the assessment. Mr. M noticed that and was pretty disappointed. He addressed the whole class in saying that he was trying his best as a teacher and he expected the same back. Just before class ended, he talked to Dylan and told him he was disappointed. Dylan took it in and left. The thing was that at recess, I found out from a friend who was close to Dylan that Dylan's mom had just been diagnosed with cancer. I'd seen Dylan with some red eyes too. I figured Dylan wouldn't say anything because I knew what he was like, but I felt Mr. M needed to know. So I lingered after class until everyone had moved to their next class and mentioned it to Mr. M. He felt so bad, it physically affected him. He leaned over his desk for a second and thanked me for telling him and talked to Dylan privately later on to arrange for him to have time for the assessment. He was such a good teacher, genuinely cared about his students, not just about getting them to have good marks, but he tried to get us to enjoy learning and be enthusiastic about life in general. Story 51. I was the student that confounded my teacher. I was a junior in high school and far more interested in finding a girl as a lab partner than actually doing anything relating to the work at all. The teacher would write assignments for homework out at the beginning of class, and I would hand them at the end of the class to be a pain in the butt. Despite not paying any attention, I would routinely A+, quizzes, tests, and labs. The breaking point he met my parents at was when I was faking experimental results within a margin of error to prevent myself from having to do the really long titration lab. He was concerned that I was utilizing linear algebra to balance chemical equations when he hadn't taught us any of it, and was convinced I was somehow plagiarizing or cheating. My dad was a traveling repairman, and my mom was a billing admin at a hospital. They were really upset, and I remember that I had felt pretty bad that I screwed up somehow, even though I denied the charge. The teacher was really put off by this as well. Not his usual case of cheating or underperformance. Then good old mom, your sister is going to be so disappointed when she learns you cheated on chemistry. Did you steal the coursework she had saved or something? Teacher asks. Wait, his sister took chemistry here? I don't remember teaching her. Mom, she didn't take it with you, but she got a 100 in the class. She's currently in Germany right now, but will be back in a month. She's going to be so embarrassed because her and him are very close. Teacher, why is your daughter in Germany? Mom, she's a chemical engineer. Everyone's light bulbs dinged at once. I still had to apologize for chasing girls over actually consciously doing the work, but all was forgiven. Turns out when I was in middle school, my sister and I would do homework together, and I would help with her high school homework. I must have retained a lot of it. Same goes for college too, I would guess. Story 52. This will probably get buried, but I was a kid in this situation, the younger brother out of two. I was blamed for everything bad that happened to our family. My dad getting cancer? Yep, that was my fault. Our family nearing bankruptcy? Yeah, must be me. My mother abused me mentally and physically. My father just minded his business and didn't intervene, or care to. I had to learn from a young age how to dress myself accordingly and all that. Mind you that we're a lower middle class family. We weren't poor but hit a rough patch because of me, obviously. I always loved going to school because it was my little place away from home where I get blamed for everything and constantly abused. One day my English teacher met my parents and they always put on a facade to look like saints. They constantly say how I'm not behaving at home or how I don't put in any effort. Now the teacher knows that all of this is bullcrap and bless her heart, she tried her best, helping me and keeping me interested in pursuing my studies. I was a straight-A student until I couldn't bother anymore. This teacher was such a lovely person, she helped me visit a psychiatrist and even paid for it. She's the only genuine person in my life that actually cared about helping me. Now I'm 20, in college, and have lost all interest in continuing my studies and still being constantly blamed. My brother, who's 24, is still living at home with us, but it's my fault we're still poor for not moving out when I hit 18. I just wanted to share my story. Sorry if the grammar, punctuation, or spelling is not perfect. I'm not a native English speaker. Story 53. Taught 8th grade English. Had a girl in my class who was, by all accounts, a perfect student. She did all of the reading on time and oftentimes read ahead, asked great questions in class, always paid close attention, even helped other students who weren't doing as well. Despite this, she always seemed really nervous. Most kids at least smile when they get a 95 plus on a test, but she never did. Anything less than 100 prompted her to stay after school and ask what she could have done or could do in the future to improve. Halfway through the year, we had to parent-teacher conference with her father. We didn't request it, we had no reason to. He called the school himself and asked to speak with us. All of our teachers are a bit surprised, but we give up our lunch and talk to the guy, thinking maybe there's something going on at home or she had an issue in school that we didn't know about. It is important to note at this point that the district I work in is pretty low income, but this guy looked anything but. He walks into an informal parent conference in a nice suit, expensive watch on his wrist, Mercedes keys in his hands, which he was sure to leave sitting on the desk in front of him for the whole meeting. Once we all introduce ourselves, he proceeds to pull out papers, copies of his daughter's old report cards, and lay into us about fluctuations in her score. How do you explain the 88 in quarter 2 when she had a 95 in quarter 1? Has her quarter 3 progress improved? All the teachers try to explain to him that his daughter is doing great in all of her classes, has a lot of friends, is very well liked, but he only cares about the numbers. He tells us that he went to Harvard, his son is going to Yale, and his daughter, again 8th grade, is going to keep up the Ivy League tradition. I can only imagine the pressure he put on that girl, but as teachers, there was nothing we could do to except reassure him that we'd push her to keep improving. I made sure to reassure her after every assignment that she was doing great, but I'm not sure how much it helped. Story 54. My wife is a teacher. I am a lawyer in the same small town. She was complaining about a child's behavior, and from the sounds of it, it was completely out of hand. Yelling, swearing, calling teachers female dogs, and very hurtful words to other children. It was a public school, so the kid couldn't even be expelled. Anyway, she mentioned the kid's first name. I made some educated guesses and worked out that 1. The kid's father was an ex-client of mine who pleaded guilty to a whole slew of offenses. I briefed counsel to do the plea, and he got about 7 years. 2. The kid's mother was a client of mine in a family law matter where she was trying to get custody of her sister's children. I quickly dropped that case when evidence came out about her biological children, some of whom had already been taken by the state. There were also accusations of abysmal parenting, ranging from excessive punishment to complete lack of discipline. Her other kids were even more of a mess. 3. I was also acting for the mother in some guardianship proceedings where the state is trying to take away her remaining children, but she fired me before we got a result, probably because I told her she was about to lose anyway, because 4. The mother's partner kept the town marijuana dealers in business, like he smoked about $100 a day constantly. He was also facing charges of child abuse, but not represented by me, thank God. That one kept me up at night for a while. Another story, same town. I was instructed by a kid facing some minor criminal charges, trivial things like trespass on school grounds, out of hours, and some minor damaged property offenses. Kid got a bond, no conviction, good result. Anyway, the father comes in to see me a year later facing charges of domestic violence, abuse, and unlawful threats. The mother has taken the kids and nicked off. By the time the mother admits the charges were made up, she was too settled with the kids in the big city for us to force a relocation. Amazingly, the other kids in that family were great students. Story 55. I was a TA during university, and this year there were 2 of us, the other being a typical blonde-haired, blue-eyed, cute girl. Usually I never get the pleasure of dealing with parents, but this one student was constantly berating the other TA, but wouldn't be in my face at all. But he would not actually do the lab work as required, thinking he knew better. Sometimes when I attended the lecture component as needed, that same student would constantly contradict the professor and try and provide edge, cause arguments to generalizations, which, as some of you logically people know, isn't an argument and just waste lecture time. But being a hippie liberal female professor, she just smiled and agreed to his antics. Example, professor says programs require RAM as primary performance metric and gives examples. Student then raises hand and says that the OS sometimes uses page file, which is in the HDD, therefore RAM isn't primary performance metric. Rolls eyes. Fast forward to after the first midterm, the student in question was furious about his failed grade so far. We were giving him zeros during labs due to his lack of actually doing any assignments, and his midterm was barely a pass, despite his perfect attendance and participation marks. After that class, the parents of this student showed up and began berating the professor, and the father wanted to single out and call out the TA. She shyly stood up and approached them with me, the whole time the father saying things like, "You disgust me." The mother was silent, holding her head down, standing behind the father wearing a full burqa. Then it clicked. The student was just following the ways of his father, which included viewing women as lesser humans. Never have I seen this kind of bullcrap outside of television, and this was almost 2 decades ago. Story 56. I've told these before, but I don't mind sharing again. 1. Student would threaten to kill me, stab me, claw out my eyes, watch me bleed, shove pencils into my arms, etc. Had to maintain a record of this as the student was going to be evaluated. Before student got the behavioral therapist, student flipped the desk he or she was at, using over onto the back of my legs as my back was turned to write something on the board. Desk took off a good bit of my skin on the ankle, and I ended up having to go see a doctor. Met with the mother later and found out that the mother had taken student off the prescribed antipsychotics without telling anyone, and was also letting an older cousin sleep in the same bed as the student. Student was a first grader. 2. Brilliant student, same class, hard worker, excellent reader. Met the mother, she was on her son about being a good person and being successful. Found out she used to be a gang rider and had finally gotten out to make a better life for her dope kids. Loved that family. 3. Did a project when I worked with special needs preschoolers where we took all their stats, height, weight, eye color, hair color, along with interests at the beginning of the year and then at the end so we could talk about how some things changed and some stayed the same. It was also something fun for the parents to take home. One student, 4 years old, weighed almost 70 pounds, met the parents. Oh, yeah, he wasn't going to get a lot of healthy life habits from them. 4. Taught middle school computers for a bit for half a school year, had a big PowerPoint project that the students worked on for about a month. They got class time to work on it, and each week they would have to email me what they had gotten done. One student refused to do work, like ever. She just sat there the entire time. Each week they were given rubrics so everyone knew what was expected. They also all had a final rubric for the end result. She kept getting zeros. After the end project was finalized, she received a glaring 0. Her parent called a special meeting with me, the student and guardian, and the principal. There were all kinds of excuses made, but I had luckily kept the signed rubrics from the kids so they knew what was expected. The guardian still tried to make excuses. I held firm. The student recently tried contacting me on Facebook telling me she forgave me because everyone makes mistakes, meaning that I had made a mistake. I didn't respond. Story 57. I had a lower economic Hispanic student in one of my classes. First-generation American and son of a farm worker. He was funny and would often disrupt my class and say stupid crap. I knew his home life wasn't the greatest, so I gave him a lot of patience. One day he decided to lay on the floor, and when I asked him to go sit in his chair, he gave me the finger. Didn't say anything, just the finger. He thought he was funny or that we had some student-teacher relationship where that was acceptable, but I sent him to the office. I didn't feel like dealing with his crap. As it happened, he had been getting into trouble in a lot of other classes. His mother shows up and she can't speak English at all. Luckily, the principal can and she's holding her baby. I realized that she was probably pulled out of work to come deal with her son and also has to carry her baby with her. I knew that his father wasn't a part of the student's life and that his mother was taking the weight of the world on her shoulders. The principal, who had dealt with this student often, was rather upset and tired of his constant troublemaking. After describing the situation to the principal and his mother, the principal decides to kick him off the baseball team. Mind you, this student is rather overweight. He looked absolutely defeated, something that could be described as kicking a puppy on Christmas. I think it was about at that point it all kind of made sense. He was just some poor kid trying to make sense of his life with very little support from his mother. She just didn't have the time or money or education to take care of an energetic teenager. I pulled the principal aside and asked to speak to him in private. I end up telling him that he needs to stay on the baseball team because it's probably one of the few structured events he likes doing and has the opportunity to participate in. The principal is at the 0 Fs limit and really doesn't like my idea. We come up with a compromise that the student can hang out with the janitor every Friday for a month after school and clean, wax, and vacuum some floors, or he can give up his spot on the team. Naturally, he chooses to clean floors. I felt this was more than adequate. I never told him how much I had to push just to let him stay on the team, and he never forgave me after that. I could tell he always held a silent grudge. It's clear he was being crap at the time and needed to be punished, but I didn't want to destroy one of the few positive things in his life. I still feel conflicted when I think about this situation. Most importantly, however, I take a lot more time and consideration when dealing with people if I'm unaware of their situation. Story 58. One of my partners is a teacher, and she tells the story of a student who she had several years back that was just awful. This kid would do things far beyond what most kids acting out would do. There was lots of yelling, throwing, walking out, etc. At the time, teachers were instructed to not write up minority kids because studies showed that writing them up increased the likelihood of pipelining them into the prison system, and the objective was to close the achievement gap between minority and white students. So the administration was unwilling to suspend any minority students acting up, even to the extreme actions that this kid was taking. Since the teachers would lose face if they sent a kid to the office, they came back with no punishment. All the teachers had to deal with this kid constantly disrupting classes without sending them to the office in most cases. The counselors were the only ones that could help, and they would only say that this kid had a bad family life, and that the teachers would just try to deal with it as best they could. This was too vague for any of the teachers to really know what was going. A bad family life could refer to almost anything after all, so they just dealt with it for years that the student was in their care. A few years after, my parent was watching a TV show where they fix up poor people's houses for free, and she suddenly realized that she recognized that past student there on the TV show. Although the counselors were never open about the home life situation, this show put everything out there in the open. This kid's mother died violently in front of them, then their father too, just a few weeks before starting school in my partner's classes all those years ago. The child had been raised by his aunt who was constantly on drugs and didn't get a stable home life until years later when his grandmother finally took him in. Ever since then, when a counselor tells my partner that a student has had a bad home life, they just need to deal with them, she remembers that kid and ends up being much more understanding of the child's actions, even when they act out in the extreme. Story 59. I teach creative writing at a high school. I have one female student who is very soft-spoken, very sweet, always works hard on her assignments. Our school is one-to-one. Each student has a school-issued laptop, so many of our school assignments are online. Some students who aren't as familiar with using the internet often struggle with this. For their first online assignment, she didn't submit her work, so I gave her a 0. All of their grades are posted online on their homepage, so she could immediately see it when she logged into her email. Less than an hour later, she sends me a very emotional email. She's sorry she didn't know how to submit her work. She's extremely upset that I gave her a 0. She doesn't want me to think she's lazy. I was really taken aback by her tone. She wasn't angry or confused. She was heartbroken. I could practically hear her crying as she wrote that email. I let her know, of course, that she could still turn in her work and that if she ever had any issues turning something in, she could always ask for help. I met her guardians at an open house. She lives with her foster parents who are in their 60s. I find out that her foster dad drives her to my school from a small rural town with a large drug problem in a border state over 45 minutes away just so she can go to a decent school. Her foster mom had a stroke a year ago and is in a wheelchair. She kept saying, "This girl is my baby. I can't help her no more." That's all she could say, and it broke my heart. Now, I make sure to praise her work whenever I can, without overdoing it. I can only imagine the kind of household she lived in before she went into foster care. On an unrelated cringe note, when her foster parents came into my classroom, I instinctively went to shake the woman's hand, not realizing she had a stroke and couldn't move her body. Story 60. I'm the kid. I traveled a lot more because of my parents' job between 2 different countries. We moved from one country to another every single year up into 6th grade. In consequence, my language abilities were extremely bad. I wasn't really able to read or write and communicate with others to the point that I learned the alphabet in the 5th grade. On the year of my 6th grade, we finally stopped to move all over around Europe and settled down in France. The professors as well as the students thought I had some mental problems which could be related to my academic lateness. So far I know, my math teacher was the only one to believe in me since I had a better understanding of mathematics. From grade 6 to 9, I did my best to improve my language skills. It was hard because each year the language requirements rose and unfortunately I wasn't able to follow the tempo. A year before the passage exam between middle school and high school, the prime teacher called my parents to discuss my special case. So far I know, it was the first time my parents explained my academic past. Our current family situation, they've got a lot of arguments since I'm young and finished by divorcing during high school, and how it could impact me. Their conversation was really long. Shortly after, I received more help to improve my language skills. I felt that the way how my professors perceived me has changed and they became more optimistic about my future. Progressively, me and my family got closer with her to finally become really close friends. Thanks to my prime teacher, I managed to pass all through the high school years, obtain my degree, which allowed me to get a scholarship for an abroad university. Without her help, I wouldn't be able to survive high school years and achieve all these things. Since then, I always try to help my peers. This way to give back what she gave me during all these years. Story 61. This happened back in the late 90s, and I was a stupid first year teaching trying to make a difference. I was working at a low-income school district. So I have 4 10th grade kids who were failing due to lack of work, skipped tests, didn't turn in homework, etc. So I took them out in the hall and I told them that I was going to keep them after school every night until they got their work in. I called their parents and I told them the same. Parents all told me that they could not pick up their kids after school due to work, so I told the parents that I would make sure they got home. I had a huge butt Buick and I decided I would drive the kids home. It was not my brightest idea, so 4 nights go by and we all get the work complete. Every night I bring the kids home, 4 stops in 4 different dang towns, and guess who's home with a working car? The frickin' parents. I went in to visit each parent and all were on the couch watching TV. No one cared about picking up their kids. I vowed never to do this again. Besides the liability issues, the parents' lack of caring about their kids forced me to understand that I could never succeed with these kids. Cycle of poverty would continue. Another story, I had a sweet kid who did nothing. He was sweet and had a good sense of humor, but refused to do anything but sit in class. Not disruptive. So I pull the stay after school bitch and he still refuses to do work. We do this for 3 nights. Same, nothing. So on the 4th night, this dad comes to pick him up and I walk the kid out to talk to the dad. I explained to him what was going on, and the kid basically switches personalities, tells his dad to F off, not once but 5 times. The dad just shrugs and says, "I can't do anything to help," and leaves with the kid. I had no heck of a chance of getting this kid to do anything if he treated his dad this way in public. Plus, his switch from a sweet lazy kid to the Antichrist kind of freaked me out. I no longer work in education. After 8 years of this type of stuff, I got burned out with giving a piece of my soul to people who did not want to learn or make the world a better place. Story 62. I am no longer in education, but I did work 10 years up until last year. If I had to pick one child, I would say it would be one of my kindergartners, named Amir. Amir came to us an absolute wreck. I'm not saying he would just not stay in his seat. No. Amir would run out of the building. Yeah. Since the school is situated right next to the freeway, it would be a heck of a time trying to get to him before he was injured. Amir was not the kind of kid who pushed another student. No, Amir would punch numerous students. On my way to the class one day, after receiving a call that all heck had broken loose in the class, I watched as 4 other students came walking down the hall, each of them holding an injured appendage. One a leg, the other an arm, another kid his face, and the other his head, all of them crying. Amir wasn't disrespectful either, unless of course you count the times that he attacked the staff, including taking an abacus and using it to knock his own teacher unconscious and giving her a concussion. Now up to this point we had reached out to the family, but we never met them. Never an open house, never a parent-teacher conference meeting, no shows at CSA meetings, things like this. This is when I took it upon myself to go out to the house with a social worker. We pulled up to this house and the yard is littered with kids' old toys. An old woman walks up to us and asks what we are doing. In the meantime, there was open-air drug dealing going on right at the house next door to where Amir lived. This is an inner-city neighborhood, a very dangerous one. Once we told the woman who we were, she announced she was Amir's grandmother. She told us we were lucky she was outside because those men weren't going to leave you alone for long, referring to the gang dealing drugs right next door, and started surrounding my car, but left once they saw me talking with Grandma. Grandma explained to me that she could leave if she wanted, but she feels she has to be there for the kids in the neighborhood because they don't feel safe. But they knew they were safe with her because the gang left her alone. I had the time to talk with Amir's mother that day as well. She was very, very angry, yelling and screaming at me about her son being classified and how she didn't want that. She told me she was dying of cancer. I don't know if I believe it or not. I hope it isn't true. Every word that came out of her mouth had venom attached to it. I thought she was going to hit me a few times. After that, it became clear to me why Amir was the way he was. He needed structure. He never had structure, and although he craved it at times, it was impossible at times for him to accept any sort of structure. Not to mention all the men on his block were strapped-up dope dealers. How was I ever going to make him understand me or even scare him with consequences into behaving like a human being? He looked at me like a joke. He wasn't scared of any of us. He had real things to be scared about, and it wasn't some teacher or administrator. I have hundreds of stories like this too, unfortunately. In fact, I had a family of 8 children who were being pimped out by older siblings in the school a year before that. That helped me understand why the youngest refused to talk to the point where he needed services as a result of it. It's a tough world out there, guys. I'm glad I'm not a part of that anymore. My gut just could not take it. Story 63. From a friend. I had a student, high school freshman, that was extremely combative with me. If I assigned a start of class activity, he would ask why he had to do it. If I assigned a fill it in yourself study guide, he would ask why I wasn't doing my job and telling them the answers. He rarely did his work, so I had mostly zeros for him in my grade book. The students are not allowed cell phones during class. I had to tell the student 3 times to put his phone away. Each time he ignored me. So I walked over to his desk and demanded he give me his phone. He responded by saying, "I ain't giving you an effing thing, you female dog." I immediately started writing up to him and told him to go to the office. He tried apologizing, even putting his phone on my desk, but I told him I had given him enough warning and he was out. I took his phone and I put it in my locked desk drawer. My policy, which students and parents know, I have them all read and sign the syllabus the first week of school, says all phones will be held 24 hours if I have to take them. This happened on a Friday, so the student couldn't get his phone back until Monday. I was called up to the office an hour after the incident. The student's mother was in the office, yelling at staff and claiming racism because I took her child's phone. My principal had already explained that the student was disruptive and that he wasn't following direction. The mother then cussed out the principal, saying the student doesn't have to give up his personal property to an effing female dog butt teacher. Security removed the mom, and the principal suspended the student for 3 days. The mom showed back up Monday morning demanding the student's phone, which I gave her, and his grade. When I told her that he had a 17, she flipped her crap again and claimed I was racist. I told her that I had over 90 students, only 5 of which were white, and that most of my students were passing. So clearly, it was an issue with her son, not my teaching or presumed racism. The student was placed in an alternative school for the remainder of the year. Story 64. I am that kid, and there was more of a story, but here's just a small snippet. My dad worked up to 80 hours a week. He was an alcoholic, but never abusive, and my mom was very sick, as she was in remission from cancer but had other health issues and was constantly strung out on all of the heavy-duty medications that my mom was on. I remember one day in 7th grade, my English teacher made us do a poetry assignment, and we had to choose a song to recite in front of the class. I chose the song Adam's Song by Blink-182 and had no idea what it was really about. I remember reading it in class and my teacher looked at me so concerned and I didn't know why. I ended up going to the counselor's office as I had been sent there and they spoke to me. I learned later on in life it spoke about self-unaliving, and I guess subconsciously that's how I felt. That is when they found out that I had been staying up till 2 or 3 a.m. or didn't even sleep many nights because I would have to pick my mom up when she fell or hit her head, or was too strung out to act like a human. I would have to get her off the toilet when she passed out, or when she would walk outside in the middle of the night and we couldn't find her. She passed away in 10th grade and I was destroyed. I still am. I was never able to grieve or mourn properly and I still have issues. I remember the counselors in high school asking me, "Do you really want to graduate because you obviously do not care about your education?" I informed them that my mom had just died and all they could effing do or say was, "Well, we need proof that she died." F those people, man. To all of you who struggle, things get better, I promise. Story 65. Here's a different take. I was teaching my first series of university courses and was required to do advising. I had a young girl. She was very sweet and absolutely wanted to be at university. She had a number of learning difficulties, and one of them manifested as a difficulty with arithmetic. To complete her program, she was required to take advanced statistics classes, but she just couldn't cope with the math. Our university is Kafkaesque. It is a major research institution, but one of our many flaws is that the heavy union presence has created a not my job mentality. Consequently, processes are broken and getting anything done is a serious uphill battle. Students who don't fit into nicely defined boxes can be out of luck really quickly, and in some instances, I would suggest they transfer. Operationally, getting things done can be impossible. Anyway, I digress. One day I was advising and the student comes in and tells me that her mother had come. Mother was an equally nice woman who was really just worried about her daughter. I could see the mother was ready to go to battle. She had a mission and programmed information all in a file, had program information printed out. I knew this was going to be tough. Knowing the university, she had probably been effed by every segment of the administration. Our school's phone service rate was through the roof, despite having hundreds of lines. We would often see that someone would be connected and on hold for 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes more. I figured Mama was coming to the source. The daughter had been put into this program by the university and told her that she needed to complete at least a year's worth of credits to transfer, with a GPA of 3.0. The issue is that she needed to take Stats 1 and 2, which I taught, and needed at least 75% in both to make a 3.0 GPA. Well, this wasn't going to happen. She could maybe pass, but it wasn't likely. Basically, this kid was screwed. Our university abolished undeclared majors and required all students be funneled into programs, often things like philosophy, sociology, and developmental studies. Programs that are niche, and unless you're interested in them, the classes would not be to your liking, making earning a 75% that much harder. So mom comes in, she wants her daughter transferred to a different program. She's very polite, but, very firm. I realize what mom wants, but I can't get someone out of prereqs. However, our university offers a number of program options. You could have a BA in development studies with a specialization in culture, economics, or infrastructure. Depending on the specialization, you have different requirements, but switching between specializations within the same degree doesn't require anything. So, I recommend that she switch from infrastructure to culture, which eliminates the need. I drop her from my Stats 1 class and sign her up for a different class. Easy peasy. The student had a smile, the mother had a grin, daughter goes to pee or play on her phone, and mother tells me that she, too, cannot do math, and was told that she was stupid. She didn't want the same for her daughter and was fighting the Kafka system we had set up. Usually, parents want to contest a grade or want preferential treatment for a kid, but this mom was fighting a stats class. Not something you see. Then it clicked. This mom had been made to feel dumb her whole life and her daughter was facing the same thing. It was probably the most satisfied I ever felt teaching an undergraduate course. As teaching undergraduates has become a terrible job, sadly. Story 66. Not my story, but my mom's. My mom is an ESL teacher for immigrant children. Just a bit of background information, it's a private school just a few blocks from the border, and so most of the student population cross the border either on foot or by car to get to school every day. Well, one semester my mom had this 12-year-old girl who would cry for everything. If she got a bad grade on a quiz, tears. If she didn't get the partner she wanted, tears. If she was called on in class, tears. It got to the point where my mom felt the need to involve the school counselor. They were worried about the possible abuse in the home. Then she started making big accusations against people in the school, including my mom. She told the counselor she was being bullied by the rest of the girls in class. She said that my mom had intentionally humiliated her in front of the class because she failed a test. She even went as far as accusing several boys in the class of touching her. As expected, this all became chaos, trying to interview students about the accusations and my mom, etc. Weirdly, the parents never got involved and never answered any phone calls or letters that were sent home with the girl. At the parent-teacher conference, my mom brought up all of these problems to them, and they were seemingly oblivious to it all. They asked her if it was true, and she started crying, to which they responded by giving her candy and telling her it was okay and that they believed she was innocent. For every negative thing my mom would bring up, including her below-average grades, the little girl would start crying, and her parents would immediately hug her, give her more candy, and do whatever it took to stop the crying, while telling her that it was okay and that she would get what she wanted. I'm not really sure what happened with the little girl, but she didn't return to school after the conference. Story 67. Late to the party here and not a teacher, but there were two little boys that were brothers in my daughter's Head Start class. I used to volunteer there a lot and go in to help with the kids and help with getting lunch and snacks ready and play with the kids at recess. And these boys made me nervous. Neither of them could talk and they were 3 to 4 years old. I would kind of understand the limited vocabulary, but these boys had none. They communicated by smiling, frowning, shrieking, whining, hitting, and grabbing. They didn't follow any directions. They wouldn't stay on the rug for story time. They made a huge mess of everything during craft time. Even when it was time to eat, they didn't seem to understand what the fork and spoon were for. They dug in with their hands and faces. They were very nearly feral, in my opinion, like nobody had bothered to raise them. But they showed up dressed and ready with their backpacks every day, and handling them was always a very difficult chore. Now, being there as much as I was, sometimes I couldn't stay because I had work or other obligations. One of the days I wasn't there, I got a call, and I'm told that the younger of the two boys bit my daughter and made her bleed. Oh, Mama Bear wasn't happy. I asked what they were planning to do, and they said their mom would be picking them up in person that day instead of them riding the bus to talk about the incident, and I was welcome to stay for that. I got there first, aka on time. We waited and waited and waited. About an hour after the bus had left with all the other kids, the two boys' mom show up. This woman, I don't know if I can even describe her accurately. She was wearing dirty t-shirts and too tight, and it was on her overweight body. Her jeans were too loose, though, because she had her butt crack on the display for everybody. Her hair was stringy and greasy, but the most important detail was her face. I don't know how to describe it, but her face looked vacant, like devoid of any thought, lacking some spark of understanding or intelligence. She just looked like a body, with no mind. Her mouth hung open the entire time, and I swear she drooled some moments. Anyway, the conversation was short. The teachers tried to explain to her all the concerns they had about the boys, including their lack of communication and violence, especially now since the younger one had broken my daughter's skin. The mom just nodded, no facial expressions, and half grunted, "Yeah," and "sorry," and "I don't know." After the meeting, there weren't any more violent incidents for the rest of the year, but by the beginning of next year, the two boys were brought in at drop-off time by their grandparents. They both called their grandma Ma and their grandpa Da. I asked one of the Head Start aides what happened, and she told me on the down low that in a nutshell, they'd called child services and raised their concerns. The mom didn't handle the visits from child services well, and apparently their living environment was not great. Some amazing child service workers deemed the mom unfit to be raising the boys, considering their behavior and mannerisms so far, coupled with her mental state, which I took as this woman is as dumb as a box of rocks and isn't raising her kids, get the heck out of there. In the end, the boys were placed with their grandparents. They don't go to my daughter's school anymore, though. Apparently, the school couldn't cater to the children that were so developmentally behind. They got transferred to a place that can handle them and get them the help they deserve and where they need to be. Whew, she wasn't kidding. Mama Bear was not happy. She roasted the crap out of that mom. But I'm glad to hear those kids are finally getting the help they need. Guys, that concludes the stories of teachers and students and pupils and whatnot. Feel free to drop down below in the comments if you have any sort of realization moments as a teacher or otherwise that you would like to share. And as always, thanks for watching.